Hello, everyone. This is Anna Sofia Canetti. Some of you know me on Facebook. Some of you know me on YouTube now. And I am a libertarian activist. I have been for a little bit of time, for a few years now. And I have made it a point, a commitment just recently to talk to people who are doing a lot of work in the movement and to get the information out about different states, what's going on, who's doing what, and where we are. Um, Today I have David Weikle as my guest. A lot of you know him. And David, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm David Weikle. I'm a libertarian from South Carolina. I have a very conservative take on a lot of things. I kind of point to the Constitution. I know that that's not really popular with some people within the movement, but I point to the Constitution as kind of a guide stone, what we can do with liberty, and that's what I base a lot of my activism on. And I'm excited to talk with you, Anna.
Thank you for pronouncing my name correctly. I get a lot of Anna. Okay. Thank you very much for being here. We have decided to talk about several topics that are particularly important right now, not just to you, but to the liberty movement. And why don't we jump right into a hot topic, gun laws?
Yes, so it's very popular to say that there's no such thing as an unconstitutional gun law. And the hard part is actually fighting against our current set of gun laws. And I'm not talking about just on the national level where people can say things like we need to get rid of uh, background checks. We need to make it so that people can just buy guns like they used to, out of like a catalog,
Mm-hmm.
like they used to be able to decades ago. But it's also fighting for gun rights on the state level, on the local level,
Mm-hmm.
because uh, we have seen instances in the last 10, 15 years where federal laws have made everyday items suddenly illegal. The thing that people are talking about possibly getting banned next are suppressors because of a shooting in Virginia Beach a little while ago. Before that, it was the bump stock ban. And the
Right.
great thing about this, pointing to this, talking about how hypocritical the duopoly is on the national level, is that Democrats push for gun control, but it takes Republicans to actually pass gun control. And if you look at most of the gun control, most of the major gun control that people have been worried about in the last 30-ish years, closer to 40 years,
Mm-hmm.
it was passed by Republicans. The Hughes Amendment was passed as part of the Firearms Owners Protection Act of 1986, and it was signed into law by the Republican president, Ronald Reagan. 922R, which is a federal regulation that deals with how many American-made parts can be in an essentially foreign-made gun, was created by George H.W. Bush, or Bush number one, however you want to call him.
Right.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and then of course you look at the bump stock ban, you look at potential suppressor ban. Those are things that have happened and have the potential to happen under Mr. He's going to save our gun rights, Donald J. Trump, President of the United States. But on the local level, on the state level, what activists can do
Mm-hmm.
is they can push for constitutional carry in states that don't have it, like my own state, South Carolina. They can push for nullification laws. In places like Kansas and Montana, they've actually passed partial nullification laws, which are still infringements on your natural right to keep and bear arms, but they have the good intention of at least offsetting federal infringements. You know, with the various names that they give for these laws, what they do is, like in Kansas, they made it so that you could buy a suppressor as long as it was made in Kansas and stayed in Kansas. And
Wow.
yeah, the ATF, of course, didn't appreciate that, and federal authorities stepped in. Uh, Recently, there was a court case. This happened around the time of the Virginia Beach shooting. It was supposed to go to the Supreme Court, and the Virginia Beach shooting happened. The gentleman who shot those people, who killed some people, he used a suppressor during his attack. And I think a week later, the Supreme Court was going to make the decision whether or not to put that on the docket, whether or not to prosecute a gentleman who had bought a suppressor that was made in Kansas. He stayed in Kansas, and he didn't feel like registering it with the ATF. And he was prosecuted for that.
Wow.
And he's gone through the appeals process, took it to the Supreme Court, and for gun owners who will defend President Trump, and sometimes I'm one of those people that will defend President Trump. What he did was he told I can't remember exactly who he spoke to, but he got across the message that he didn't want anyone to interfere. He didn't want anyone to take part in the case. And so that case never made it to the Supreme Court. And so you have gun owners whose rights have been infringed because the state in the form of Kansas tried to protect some of their rights. Meanwhile, the central government, the federal government, stepped in and is continuing to infringe on their rights. So,
Right. That gets very confusing with a lot of laws. You know, the state says one thing, federal says another thing, and this happens with marijuana possession laws as well. You know, I've seen stories of people getting arrested for bringing their medical marijuana on a plane when they have a card, you know, from a state where medical is approved, right? To going to another state where it's completely legal, but somewhere in the middle there at the airport, they get arrested.
yeah, it's completely insane.
Yes.
And honestly, the growth of federal power, you can look back to a Supreme Court case in 1942 to really have this grand understanding of why the federal government has its fingers in so many pies. So are you familiar with Wickard versus Philhorn?
Right. I have to mute my phone.
You're fine.
I apologize.
Oh, you're fine. You can fix this stuff in post-production if you want to.
No.
But are you familiar with Wickard versus Philhorn?
No, I'm not.
So it was a case that was decided by the Supreme Court in 1942, and it was one of the most important cases that has had the longest lasting impact. Now, what happened, and this case was decided in 1942, so obviously these actions happened before, but as part of the New Deal, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was president at the time, Democratic president at the time, he had set quotas with regards to a lot of agricultural production. So you couldn't go above certain numbers with regards to certain crops. And there was a farmer in Ohio who grew wheat on his own farm to feed his own animals. And he was actually taken to court, and the justification for everything was that, and the court decided that he was participating in interstate commerce by choosing not to participate in interstate commerce, because he, by growing the wheat that he was not legally allowed to grow, he did not buy wheat in the quote unquote open market. And so because he didn't buy that wheat, he affected interstate commerce. He affected national commerce. So his choosing to grow his own wheat and to not buy anything from anyone
Hmm.
is what they nailed him on. That's what they penalized him for.
Wow.
And it's insane. And it's been used to justify the federal government's ability to reach into all sorts of things. You know, like you're talking about medical marijuana, medicinal cannabis, whatever you want to call it, weed, pot, whether it's medical or recreational, on a
Mhm.
state by state basis, the
Right.
states, the individual states, you know, California has the right to have medicinal marijuana, have the
Right.
right to have recreational cannabis. And the federal government does not have the authority from a constitutional perspective to step in to stop that commerce from happening inside the state of California.
Oh,
Now,
correct.
yes, unfortunately though, because of cases like Wickard versus Fulborn, you can't do that because the federal government has decided, you know, through the Supreme Court, that they can interfere in commerce within a state because of this idea that if commerce happens or if commerce doesn't happen, it is something that the federal government can interfere in. And so it's given itself a magic wand to do whatever it wants. And that's why we have, from FDR on to today with Donald Trump, that's why you have all of these agencies, all of these bureaucracies. That's why they have the ability to step in and stop you from doing whatever commerce they want. It's just a matter of, is there enough money for them to get involved and to mess up your life?
Right. I mean, it sounds a terrible lot like the Soviet Union.
I mean, you have more personal experience with that than I ever would. Um,
Mhm.
but you know, we are creeping slowly towards this idea of incrementalism,
Right.
in changing things. You know, because Republicans, like I said, Democrats scream for gun control in various forms, but it takes Republicans to pass it. It takes a Republican president to pass it in most cases. It takes a Republican legislature to pass it. And
Correct.
what's happening is what's happened generally, and the last few years have actually been different. What's happened generally is the this traditional idea of left versus right. You know, Democrats being more to the left these days,
Right.
and Republicans being more to the right,
Right.
is the left has dragged Republicans slowly in this tug of war slowly through incrementalism till we get to this point where people are okay with a Republican president taking away bump stocks, which are a worthless accessory, but it's someone's private property, and the government doesn't have a say over whether or not you can own that thing.
Correct. Um, Now, to give you my personal experience with gun rights, just here locally in San Diego, it was very easy for me to buy a gun, and I actually ordered it from a different state online, but they delivered it here um, to unauthorized seller, correct? And because I don't have a criminal record, I don't have any problems. It was very, very easy for me to get. Now, somebody with a conviction, on the other hand, which could be, again, drug possession that gets classified as a felony, obviously a nonviolent person could not get a gun at all. And that bothers me. It bothers me that, a person who is a young person, maybe in their 20s, did some drugs, is now forever banned from owning a firearm for their protection.
Well, that is troublesome, and it gets to the bigger part of the conversation as to whether or not it's about safety, as some people like to say, or whether it's about restricting people's rights. I am of the opinion, and it's not just me, some rando libertarian guy, um, gun rights activist here in South Carolina, but there are a lot of people who are gun rights activists all across the country who believe that after you serve your time for whatever crime you've committed
Mm-hmm.
and you are rehabilitated,
Mm-hmm.
you should be able to have your rights restored in full.
I absolutely believe that as well.
Yeah, and that includes voting rights, that includes gun rights. Because what happens is if you don't allow those people to have their rights back in full, what you've created are people that are no longer able to defend themselves effectively. And you've created a victim class where you didn't need to create a victim class. And if you're concerned about the safety of the general public, then on a case by case basis, you have to look at the individual who is going through this process to be rehabilitated for whatever crime they committed.
Mm-hmm.
Before they get released, you have to make sure that that person is ready and able to rejoin society as a
Sure.
free citizen. And if they aren't ready to do that, then you need to come up with some sort of plan in order to get that person ready.
Sure.
And that covers everyone. And that is a huge form of sweeping criminal justice that can't be done with the stroke of a pen from Donald Trump. It's not something that the federal government should do, except for people who commit federal crimes. It is something that should be done on a state by state basis, but it should be encouraged. The federal government can set a model and show the rest of the country how to do it, but the federal government can't tell South Carolina or California, this is how you have to do it. We have to decentralize things. We have to localize power because, like I said, with a case like Wickard versus Filborn, we have this huge federal government that has given itself power, and we don't want to give it more power. In fact, we need to take away powers from the federal government. Powers
Absolutely agreed.
assumed.
Absolutely agreed. I also think that putting people into a position where no matter how much time they do in prison, they can never have all their rights back after. It's not just victim. You're forcing a person into being somebody who has no hope. And there's nothing more dangerous than people who have nothing to lose.
Yeah, that's a good assessment. That's a really good assessment there. I agree with you on that.
Yeah, so I also know that we have the highest incarceration rate in the United States compared, just by numbers, by per capita, everything, compared to any other country. Why are we doing this?
Well, I'm sure that there's a long, nuanced answer, but I know that a huge part of it is that we're creating criminals every day with laws that are passed by both the federal government and by state and local governments. You know, the easiest example to point to, of course, is the drug war. You know,
Yes.
because look at how many people use cannabis in whatever form everywhere in the country. Now, I have no desire to use recreational cannabis.
Me
Um,
neither. I, yeah, I'm
but
not interested in it. But I want for people who want it to have the right to do it without becoming a criminal.
exactly, I can go over a long list. I don't use tobacco. I don't use alcohol. I don't use any sort of recreational drugs. I don't hold it against someone who wants to use those recreational drugs. Um, I think that people should be able to grow cannabis like tomatoes. I think that you should be able to go to Lowe's and buy cannabis starts. I think that you should be able to order seeds if that's your thing, whatever the case may be. Um, but what's happened is we've taken something that was grown here as a huge part of American history when it comes to things like cannabis and hemp both have
Right.
been a huge part of American history. American naval vessels for a very long time, centuries, used hemp root. Um, and cannabis has, of course, been shown to have medicinal properties. And unfortunately, it has been banned on the federal level for over 100 years. Well, close to 100 years on the federal level. And various states have had bans in place for what would have been a century now. But even with that, you know, Oregon was the first state to decriminalize, and that was in the 1970s. You know, almost 40 years after federal prohibition went into place, Oregon started to relax things inside their own borders.
Mm-hmm.
And now, you know, with all of that, even with prohibition, people were still managing to smoke weed. People were still managing to smuggle it in, and you know, whether it was across state lines or across national borders. And I like to compare it to what happened in, you know, during federal prohibition of alcohol. You had gangsters who brought it in through Canada. You know, you had gangsters who would go out into international waters, meet with, you know, a ship, and they'd trade booze. You know, they'd get their booze and then they'd take it back to, say, New York. They'd take it back to Florida. They'd take it back wherever. You look at dry counties across the United States right now. Moonshine is part of my family's history, even though I've never had real moonshine.
Me neither. That sounds horrifying.
But you know, in the hills of West Virginia, you have a lot of dry counties, and the only way that people can get alcohol is if they, you know, brew their own beer, make their own wine, or just buy some moonshine. And that's not the safest way to do things, but it's better than, you know, for some people going without. And it's easier than driving, you know, hours and hours to be able to buy the stuff legally. And so the federal government doesn't have any constitutional power to prohibit drugs. And the only place in the Constitution that deals with prohibition of any kind of drugs dealt with alcohol, and that was the prohibition of alcohol and, of course, the repeal of prohibition of alcohol. And it really should be something that's decided by the states. I don't see a reason why the states should prohibit something like that. It's a victimless crime, like we've talked about before.
Right.
But there's no reason why they should, but there's even less reason for the federal government to have any role in the drug war.
Absolutely. And what I was bringing up before is that somebody, you know, who's just flying from one state where cannabis is medicinally allowed to another state where it's completely allowed, somewhere there in the middle at the airport, that's where they get arrested. So they're following both of the states' laws, traveling from and traveling to, but then there's a federal law that gets them arrested. It's really crazy.
It's insanity. And, you know, not to beat a dead horse, but the federal government doesn't have that power. The federal government has never had that power.
It shouldn't.
And it shouldn't. It's just been a power that it's bestowed upon itself.
Yes.
And that's why there are people like me who say we have to take a sledgehammer to the federal government. We have to gut these bureaucracies, and we have to have extreme principles to run against the federal government.
Right. So before we move on to the next topic, personal anecdote story, I read yesterday that my city is introducing a bill where you have to have your firearm locked in a safe. So that means you have to buy a safe and lock it in the safe. Now, my question to that is, what is the point of me having a gun for my self-protection when I have to get it from a safe if an intruder comes in? You know, do I tell them, hang on, let me just type in my combination here into my safe, and then it just makes it kind of ridiculous.
Well, it's because they are not trying to change the behavior of criminals, Anna. They are trying to change the behavior of law-abiding people. Um, and this is this is my personal philosophy when it comes to things like this. Um, there's a Latin phrase that I would butcher if I tried it, but a bad law is no law is what it translates into in English.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is an example of a bad law. And you know, given where you live versus where I live, if I was in that position here in South Carolina, I would just say, I'm not buying a safe. I'm not buying a safe because you have no right to dictate to me what kind of private property I have to own, what kind of private property I'm not allowed to own. And it's better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6. I would rather be judged by a jury of my peers for breaking a bad law
Yes.
in defending myself, defending my family, defending others who need it, than I would be in obeying a bad law and not being able to do those things as readily as I should be able to. And that's, you know, where you fall on it is up to you. You know, there are people that live in states where you have to have a permit in order to carry a gun who go and they carry a gun and they
Yeah,
don't
I have
ask.
a permit.
Go ahead.
I have a permit. That's what I was saying. It was very easy for
Yeah,
me to get.
yeah. Well, I don't have a permit. I used to have a permit for the state of Utah, but I have never had a permit for the state of South Carolina. And at this point in my life, I never will have a permit for the state of South Carolina because I shouldn't have to ask for permission to exercise not just, you know, this idea of this Second Amendment right, but this natural right to be
Hmm.
able to defend myself. Now I'm smart about it. I obviously don't carry into a courthouse or anything like that,
Right.
but you know, I do what I have to be able to defend myself, to defend my family, to defend others around me who would otherwise not be able to defend themselves. And I'm not going to ask for a permission slip from the king, as it were, in Colombia, just so that I can do that.
Correct. Well, I am hoping that this bill that they introduced here in San Diego is not going to pass because it's just completely illogical. But if it
I
does,
mean,
fight it.
yeah, I mean, fight it however you can. And you know, whenever there's a bad gun law like that, I always encourage people to reach out to whoever is trying to do that and to fight it. And you know, we have a city here in South Carolina that's trying to impose red flag laws inside of their city limits. And without going too much into what a red flag law is, it basically allows the government to take your guns without any due process. And I don't want to see that happen in Colombia. I don't want to see that happen in North Augusta. I don't want to see that happen in California. But there are a fair number of states that pass laws like that. And
Yeah.
when you talk about gun restrictions in California, Anna, I'm really not surprised that San Diego is looking to force gun owners to buy a safe. Um, and I'm sad to say that it's not because, you know, gun owners don't want those things. It's because there are more people, they outnumber you, who don't care about your basic human right to defend yourself. And there seem to be more and more of them every day, from what I've heard.
Right. So the reason why I have a gun is because I'm a woman living by myself. And if an intruder comes in, they're probably a lot bigger than me. And I'm not interested. I really don't want to kill anybody. But if I point a gun at them, they're going to act much differently than if I just, scream or something. That's
Yeah,
what I mean by self-protection.
yeah, of course. You know, everyone has, different needs when it comes to self-defense. Me, I'm kind of a big guy. I'm 6'1", depending on the humidity. 5'11" to 6'1", depending on the humidity and whether or not I'm wearing boots. Um, I am a Marine veteran, been
Right.
4 years in the Marines, not infantry or anything like that. I was, I got to hang out with those guys, but I got very basic training in arms and very basic training when it came to hand-to-hand combat. And so I feel a lot more confident dealing with people in other ways, but I still carry a gun with me almost everywhere I go because on the other side of the coin, I am a disabled veteran, and I have a cane that I use almost everywhere I go, so that I don't fall and bust out these pretty teeth that my dad paid an orthodontist lots of money to make sure that they're straight and white.
Mhm.
And I use a gun so that if I ever need to, and I have had to, um, I can, at the very least, I can deter someone who might have bad intentions, you
Right.
know. And at the very worst, if someone does try to start something with me, if someone does mean to do me harm, or my wife, or my son, or someone else, then I have the means, the ability, and the willpower to do what I have to. And having that gun is an important part of that equation.
Yes. How do you feel about requiring marksmanship training as part of um, being qualified to own firearms?
Well, I'll kind of answer your question with a question.
Okay.
And we may differ on this, but do you think that there should be a literacy test for people who want to protest their government?
Ooh, that's a good one. Um,
Because I don't think that people should have to take a literacy test in order to protest their government.
right. And
And
yeah, this is a good one. That was a very good question of you to ask, which makes me think. I would say I don't know. Because this is the kind of thing I think about a lot. As far as getting a driver's license, right? You have to pass a test that you're actually able to drive. And that is for the sake of safety of everybody else on the road. So I think that being able to handle the gun correctly is in that same kind of vein of intention. But I really don't have a good moral answer to whether any of that is right or wrong. I don't. What do you think?
I can understand the pragmatic reasons for wanting to have people go through some sort of marksmanship training, make sure that they're, some sort of marksmanship qualification. My own state requires that if you seek to get a permit, it's part of the process. I can understand that,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't agree with it. And it comes down to the idea that government is not supposed to make any laws that restrict your right to keep and bear arms. And it is your natural right to do those things. It's your natural right to be able to defend yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And while I can understand the pragmatic reasons for it,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's one of those things where maybe what we do is we encourage people to, instead of pushing for a law that requires a marksmanship qualification, we
Educate, not force.
we instead offer education We, through various organizations, the NRA is a huge organization that I disagree with on most things these days. But the NRA offers education. The NRA certifies instructors. Doesn't mean that that certification is the best, but they're better than someone who has otherwise received no training. And I think that if we encourage those things, that's different than forcing people to be qualified in order to have a gun.
Right. So when I went to pick up my gun last year, they gave me a list of shooting ranges, local.
Okay.
They said, you might enjoy these. It was, none of this was coercion. It was just like, here, if you want to go practice your gun, you can do it here and here and here at these different places. And I said, that's very kind of you. Thank you. See, I liked that.
Yeah. The other thing, part of the reason why I don't like the idea of having permits, like permitting you in order to carry a gun, having a marksmanship qualification in order to buy a gun, is I compare it to, say, poll testing or a poll tax
Right.
in order for you to vote. Now, I don't know what, say, California's history is of poll taxes or poll test, but of course, being in the Deep South, South Carolina is just about as deep as you can go, and in the Deep South, I really don't think that we should restrict people's rights by forcing them to get a permit in order to be able to defend themselves legally. And I don't think that any sort of test is something that we should force people to go through. Now, getting back to this idea of encouraging people to have marksmanship training,
Right.
Encouraging people to know what the laws are. Those are things that can be done through the shop owners. When you go to buy a gun, they might encourage you, like you said, hey, here are a number of ranges that you can go to here in and around San Diego.
Right.
They might also encourage you, hey, the first of the month, the first Saturday of the month, the local sheriff comes down, or he has one of his deputies who will come and he'll teach you about the laws regarding self-defense, or something that's pertinent to someone who's bought a gun.
Right.
It might be incorporated into a hunter safety course, that sort of thing.
Right.
There are ways to do these things without restricting people's rights, and there are ways to do these things without forcing people to buy back their rights, as it were.
Yes, exactly. Buy back their rights. Now, I've been trained since I was 8 by my grandfather, who has now passed, Georgi Mosashvili. He was one of the top 20 snipers in World War II. We did a lot of shooting every summer, and he was very meticulous about it. So that was when I started. I obviously don't need marksmanship training because I've been doing it for so long. But I just think that people who haven't done any of it and want to buy a gun, they should probably learn how the thing works, how to but they shouldn't be forced to. They should be encouraged to, just like you said.
Yeah.
That's my point on that.
Well, there are ways that you can that the market can provide a solution to that, and it might be something as simple as you go to buy a gun, you don't have any training, you don't have any qualifications, and part of your purchase, you get a voucher to go to a range that's nearby, or you get a voucher to go to their range.
Right. Yes.
Incorporated into the shop. And that does a couple of things. First off, it doesn't force someone to do something.
Yes.
And
That's
secondly,
yes.
it is something that the market can do. And depending on, who's selling the gun, if they have a range there, um, that's something that will potentially encourage people to come back to that range. That's an upsell because,
Right.
gun shops are notorious for their prices, but people don't understand from behind the counter that they don't make money from selling guns. They don't make a whole lot of money by selling ammo. They make money by selling accessories. They make money by selling things that are related to, say, hunting or camouflage or other things. If they have a range, that can be their bread and butter. They don't make money off of these other things. They make money off of the things that you upsell. And like I said, that is good for the market. That is potentially a market-driven solution.
Mhm.
And again, we're not forcing anyone to do anything in order to exercise their rights.
Right. Yes. So, final question on this topic, because we have to move on to our next topics. Um, so, what is your gun that you carry that you really like?
I carry a couple of different guns, depending on the situation. But I carry a basic white girl Glock 17. It's a full size 9mm pistol, and then I have a pocket Sig 938, which is another um, 9mm pistol,
Mm-hmm.
and that's probably the nicer of the two. But I prefer the Glock because I like a gun that actually fits in my hands versus a gun
Because
that
you're a white
will. Yeah, well, you know, I
girl.
I'm I'm retraining some of my language for the podcast. If we were having a chat over, say, you know, beer or coffee in a private setting, I might use something like a basic white witch, you know, with a little bit of water substitution. But it
Yes.
the Glock
The Glock does the job. It does. Yes.
it's a Toyota Camry of pistols. It's not sexy, it's not cool, but it gets the job done.
Right.
So and I started carrying that. I bought one actually because I got a job working security, and while we carried a different caliber, we carried a full size Glock as our duty pistol, and
Okay.
so it just made sense to have familiarity with one, and then you have familiarity with the other because it's the Toyota Camry of pistols. So
Right. I only have one gun. Um, I was thinking about purchasing a second one, and then I changed my mind. But the one that I do have is 357 Magnum
okay.
because I'm that good at shooting.
Well, there are good reasons to carry a 357 Magnum. Depending on who made it and other factors, it can be a nice heavy gun um, with low recoil, especially if you're shooting something like 38s out of it. You know,
Hmm.
get a lot of the same power, and wheel guns, revolvers have a certain level of natural intimidation. So
Yes.
depending on how big it is, and it's also very easy to conceal in, say, a purse or
Yes. That's why I wanted a small, non-clunky one. So that was the choice I made, and I'm happy with it.
well, good for you.
Thank you. Okay, we have to move on to our next topic, which is the contentious one, immigration.
Yes, immigration. Immigration is a contentious topic for everyone these days. You've got libertarians that are fighting libertarians,
Oh yeah.
uh, and they're throwing out things like "you're not a real libertarian because you believe in X," or "you're not a real libertarian because you believe in Y." And then you have Democrats, which are calling for open borders with the welfare state. give illegal immigrants, free health care and all sorts of other goodies. And then you have Republicans that are like, let's build the wall, let's deport them all, let's not take anyone else in. And it's a contentious subject. You're right.
It is. What are your views on how the process should work for people who want to immigrate into the U.S. to be able to do so?
So I refer everything back to the Constitution, and I have a pocket Constitution I take everywhere.
We need to get you a pocket for the pocket Constitution.
A pocket for the pocket Constitution?
Yes. Oh,
I have pockets. I just, I've got it on my desk right now, so I can just.
There was this video a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, that was by the Reason magazine. There's this guy who's a comedian, and I forget his name, and he made a video about how they gift ideas for the libertarian in your life, and one of them was a pocket for the pocket Constitution. Wow. I'll send you the video. Yeah, it's pretty hilarious.
I appreciate that. I'm sure I'll get a good laugh out of it.
Yes. So anyway, back to the topic.
Back to the topic of immigration. So I refer to the Constitution, and the Constitution does not cover immigration for the federal government. And some people take that to mean that if there's any control over immigration, it's not the federal government that controls it. It would be the individual states that have control over it. And I don't know if that's actually the case, if the individual states can control immigration. But what I with the bigger topic of immigration, we have to realize, I look at it from kind of a medical perspective. I'm looking at it as this is the Marine in me, the combat lifesaver training that I took while I was in the Marines. And I look at it as a first aid situation. We have all of these people that are trying to immigrate to the United States, both legally and illegally. And there are a ton of barriers to come here legally, a ton of barriers. And there are barriers to coming here illegally, but it's not as arduous. In some ways, it feels like people in government, certain people, certain factions, political factions, favor illegal immigrants over legal immigrants. And what I've told people every time I've talked about immigration is we have to get back to what I'm calling free market immigration. And the concept with free market immigration is that there has been government interference in the market. And the two biggest magnets, the two biggest things that act as interference in the market that the government has complete control over is the welfare state and the drug war. And if you eliminate the welfare state, completely eliminate the welfare state and make it anything that replaces it completely non-compulsory. In other words, you can volunteer to give into any sort of welfare program that's set up after we destroy the welfare state, demolish it. Then you have one last magnet for people who may be coming here to take advantage of the welfare state. And I don't say that because I believe that there are huge numbers of people that believe that, that are actually doing that, but because that is an argument that Republicans use for building a border wall on our southern border.
You know that immigrants can't get welfare, right?
Well, that's the thing. illegal immigrants cannot receive welfare.
Legal immigrants can't either.
Yes, but who can receive welfare? Let's say you have a family of 6 and 5 of them are illegal immigrants, but you have one American-born child.
Hmm.
What happens is that American-born child
Can
can,
get food stamps of like $80 a month. That's
they
about it.
can, yeah, well, but
That's
they,
about
they can receive those benefits, okay? And I'm not saying that I hold it against that family. I'm not saying that I hold it against that child. But the Republican argument against illegal immigration deals with the fact there are people that are going to do that. There are people that are going to try and take advantage of the system. If you eliminate the welfare state and make it completely non-compulsory, you eliminate that Republican argument for stopping immigration.
it. Right.
Okay.
So,
The other thing, go ahead.
no, you go ahead. And then I have a point to make as well.
So you eliminate that Republican talking point when it comes to immigration. And another thing that happens is if people who are receiving welfare, um, because of the way that welfare is calculated based off of family size and family income, if those people are receiving less in benefits than is feasible for them to stay here, if it's more feasible for them to return to their country of origin, whether that's Honduras or Brazil or Guatemala or some country in Africa, wherever they may be coming from, if it makes more sense for them to go home, then they can go home. You remove those incentives that are driving them here, and you also eliminate the Republican talking point about immigrants stealing from the American people, from the American taxpayer.
Right.
And so it's two birds with one stone.
Right.
Libertarians want to get rid of the welfare state because taxation is theft. Republicans want to get rid of the welfare system because they don't realize taxation is theft, but they realize that the welfare system is theft for them. If you replace it with a completely voluntary system, a non-compulsory system, you eliminate the Republican arguments, and again, you remove an incentive.
Okay. Let me think about this. I learned this new term that was used by several people a few days ago that's called Stockholming, which is to tie immigration to welfare and delay any discussion about immigration until welfare is dealt with.
I'm familiar with that. I'm familiar with that concept.
Mm-hmm.
And my counter argument to that is that while I want to abolish the welfare state, that doesn't mean that we have to stop immigration reform. It doesn't mean that we can't work towards free market immigration.
Okay, good.
Because
that's very good to hear. Thank you.
Because what we can do in order to help facilitate easier migration, say I have friends that live in border towns, okay?
Mm-hmm.
They have, they work in government in one form or another, and they will see people who live in Mexico. They will cross over, they will work in an American border town, and then they go home. What is stopping us from opening up visa programs and creating, say, a shall issue visa to make it easier for people who live, say, anywhere in Mexico
Mm-hmm.
to go through and then to work in the United States? Now, you still have to go through, say, basic health and safety check that an employer might want you to go through in order to work for them. But what you're doing is you're making it easier for those people to come here and to work legally. And one of the things that you can do with that also is you can tie some small marginal fee to it for this shall issue visa. Don't make it some exorbitant thing like $10,000. If you make it some huge amount like $10,000, you're just going to continue to have illegal immigration. But if you make it something small, something that will cover the cost of doing the paperwork,
Right.
You make it something that people can pay into, it is something that people can basically invest in America, invest in getting a job in America. Okay? And doing that, people are going to be more likely to go through ports of entry. We may need to build new ports of entry depending on where they are. We may need to expand ports of entry, as the case may be. But that will end a lot of, people just hopping the border in order to work in the United States. And when people have a visa, a couple of things can happen, because I've heard about this in a county here in South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
There are people that are trafficking people into the country, and they're not cartels. They're construction companies. And what they do is they're bringing these people across the border from Mexico, because Mexico is on our border. They may come from some third country, but they're coming in through Mexico. They bring them here to South Carolina, and I'm hearing all this secondhand, but they do a couple of things. They get these people to work for them. They somehow either pay them under the table, or they pay them with a fake, social security number, fake IDs, that sort of thing. And then these people go and they live inside of, say, a trailer, like a mobile home, and they get charged rent to live there. Right. And they're not getting paid as well as they might have otherwise, but they're getting paid more than they might make in, say, Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, wherever they came from. And if they don't pay their rent, if they do anything, they might get reported to INS. Well, they might get reported to ICE and potentially get deported. So they have to, obey their employers, do whatever they have to in order to survive. If you issue something like a shall issue visa, you don't make it free, because it's not free to process the paperwork. It's not free to print off the paperwork. But you make it some marginal fee that helps cover the cost of doing that.
Right.
People are more likely to come legally. And when they have that visa, someone with a visa, someone with a passport, they have a valid ID, they have a valid work permit for the United States.
And they get a driver's license, and they can get car insurance and just feel like a human instead of hiding and living in fear.
Yeah, and this is not a call for open borders. Like some people want people to just, and I know that that's going to get me some flack from libertarians. But what this is it's removing the government's interference in the market.
Right.
And when we do this, depending on how well received the program is, something that may happen is we may have to start contracting out agencies. I use that term loosely. We may have to start contracting people out to help to process the paperwork, in order to help expand ports of entry, in order to build new ports of entry. But with that, it's not necessarily growing government control. It's what we want to shoot for is for, say, private control of the border. This idea that instead of using eminent domain to build a border wall, instead of using eminent domain to buy more land to expand these ports of entry, have the federal government, when it's doing these things, buy that land, and if they can't get the person to sell, then go somewhere else. Build your road somewhere else. Expand somewhere else, as the case may be.
Sure.
And yeah.
So I had this experience a couple of days ago that, I acted cool and collected, at the time, but it made me very angry. So it was at a board meeting for our caucus, and I was challenging the language because, they wrote a resolution on where we stand about immigration, but it kept saying illegal aliens, and I said we need to change that language. It has to be undocumented people, because when you call something, when you call somebody alien, it's dehumanizing. That was my whole point. And language is important in some cases like this one. So some person there said, "So are you undocumented?" to me. And I said, "So me wanting to change this language in our plank means that I'm undocumented to you? Why?" He didn't have a very good answer to that, and it resorted to attacks and things like that. But it's just strange because sometimes you want to, or I want to try to build the bridge with people who are very against immigration, and sometimes there's just no getting there from here.
Well, on certain issues, there is no middle ground, and for me, there's no middle ground when it comes to defending the right to keep and bear arms. And for some people, the issue that they have that they are not going to cede any ground on is immigration. And that's why I know I'm going to get flack from my appearance here, because there are people that are going to say that I'm being too soft. There are going to be people that are saying that I'm being too hard when it comes to things. There are people that are going to say that we should build a wall all across our southern border, and when we get done with that, build one along the Canadian border with the lower 48 and with Alaska.
Well, my solution is much better because, as you probably already know, most people who are here undocumented at this point didn't come here by walking across the border. They flew and
Yeah.
overstayed their visas. So my solution to the whole problem is build a dome. I call it honest dome of freedom, where everybody's kept in and there's no flights and you can't get out. It's a joke, it's sarcastic.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's yeah, let's build a dome. I even have pictures of it that I made. Florida, for some reason, doesn't fit
Ah.
into the
See.
dome, because it hangs off the side.
Yeah.
Yeah, and people ask me, well, why isn't Florida in there? I'm like, well, I'm figuring it's gonna fall off the continent anyway, so forget Florida.
Oh, Florida's not going to fall off. Florida might sink. It's California that's going to fall off. And you know, we're friends. We're friendly people most of the time with each other.
Yeah.
But I'll have you know that there are lots of people outside of California that root for California to just fall into the ocean every time there's a major quake.
Oh, I know,
So,
and they always talk about it too, and I always tell them the same thing. Yes, California is the worst. Do not ever move here. More
I
of
honestly,
it.
yeah, I honestly want to figure out how we can contain California, because you know um, they've discovered this in Austin. They've discovered this in a lot of other places in quote unquote red states, um, where you get people who leave California and they complain about all the things that happen in California. They complain about taxes. They complain about lack of services. They complain about gun laws, whatever the case may be, and then they move to a city like Austin, Texas,
Hmm.
and they're a Republican in California, but they might as well be a Democrat in Texas. And they don't understand they've left California, and they don't understand that they have, um, they in some cases voted for a lot of the things that they hated. And then they start to, I think the term is Californicate, places like Texas and Idaho and other quote unquote red states, which is why Californians, native Californians, have a very bad reputation everywhere outside of California, with very few exceptions, of course. Um,
Right. But the funny thing is that we don't care. It just makes
oh,
us laugh.
that's fine. That's fine. I'm from South Carolina,
I
and
know.
uh, we were one of the first states to leave the Union in 1860.
Right.
Uh,
That's right.
as part of, yep, and we kicked off the Civil War when we fired on Fort Sumter. So we have a proud heritage. There's some things you might not be proud of, but we're proud of our rebellious attitude, um, which is part of what informed, um, my political positions.
Yes.
Um, but the other part of immigration that I was talking about that we don't
Right.
have to go into deep details with is, of course, ending the drug war. Um, but that ties into, hey, if you look at what the cartels are doing. Cartels aren't the only ones that are bringing people in, but they are trafficking people. They are trafficking in drugs. They're trafficking in sex workers, and they're growing legitimate businesses in other places. But those are things that are driving illegal immigration to the United States. So obviously, if we end prohibition, we take out a huge part of their business revenue. Uh, if recreational cocaine then has to go through ports of entry, because it can go through ports of entry, there might be standards or, something that they have to deal with, but they can deal with that business. They don't have to worry about, um, getting it through illegally. When it comes to trafficking people, the reason why they can traffic people the way that they can is because they can charge people thousands and thousands of dollars. I think in one case, $10,000 for, say, a mother and a child. That's a lot of money in America in some cases. Um, it would take a while to get that. If you're coming from a country like Honduras, which is where my example came from, I believe, uh, that takes, that may take years of pinching pennies. And if they can charge someone for that, that person is motivated to do whatever it takes to come into America. If we were to, getting back into my solution of shall issue visas, work visas, have someone come in, apply in Mexico. We can set up, some sort of way to do that. Apply in Mexico, even if they're from a third country. If they apply in Mexico, pay a marginal fee for that work visa, they can then cross into the United States. They can have that work visa. They can get an apartment. They can get it. They can rent a house. They can do whatever they need to. They can work wherever they need to, and contribute to the American economy. And like my ancestors, like my wife's ancestors, who came here, um, in the 18th and the 19th centuries, those people can integrate into our economies. They can integrate into our communities. They can assimilate. And when we get rid of the welfare state that is driving some illegal immigration, I won't try and quantify it, but it's driving some illegal immigration. You get rid of that, bad elements that are coming here um, for the drug war, bad elements that are coming here to leech off of American taxpayers. Those people will self-deport if they don't want anything other than to be a part of that. And if people actually want to integrate and come here, like everyone did before the 19th century without any help but your own, well, they'll either succeed and stay and become a part of our communities, like the Polish, like the Irish, like the Germans did, or they'll go home. And that works out for everyone. That works out for immigrants who want to come here and want to be a part of the American experiment. And it works out for Americans that have been here, their families have been here for generations.
You know what? This is a very reasonable take, and I'm very happy that that's a take that you have on it, because it's a hot button for me. You know that one.
Oh yes, obviously. But the thing is, as reasonable as this sounds to you and me and a lot of other people, like I said, anyone who's listening to this podcast after you drop it, I'm going to get hit from the left because I'm some racist World War II reenactor from Central Europe, or I am from the right, I am all for open borders and whatever, and I just want the America to burn. And it's none of those things. It's I want to have reasonable immigration, and the most reasonable form of immigration is free market immigration. Let immigrants and let our communities decide what they can handle. When we have the government interfere, we get pockets of communities that become ghettos. We get pockets of communities where people do not integrate, and where people are unwilling or unable to integrate, because if they try to integrate, then they will go to jail. If they try to integrate, then any number of things can happen. And this won't cost the American taxpayer money in the long run, because if we eliminate welfare, if we eliminate the drug war, those are two things that are draining our economy. And if we are not prioritizing immigrants based off where they're coming from, we eliminate, say, the quote unquote lottery, and people just come here on their own dime.
There are quotas by countries, depending on which administration is in power. Quotas change on which country we want immigrants from and which country we don't.
Yes, and those quotas have been around since the 19th century. But you go back prior to that, and it was basically, if you could get on a boat and get over here, you could become a part of the American experiment. My wife's family immigrated, funnily enough, from Tsarist Russia in the 19th century. Yeah. Well, they got run off during one of the pogroms. So.
Okay. That sounds like an interesting story for a conversation later. We're on a podcast right now.
Yeah. But if we just allow people to be a part of the market, and we let the market dictate what's going to happen, then we'll have fluctuations in our immigration levels. Sometimes it will be high, sometimes it'll be low, and sometimes we'll have a net negative when it comes to immigration. We'll have more people leaving that are coming, and that's a good thing. The government shouldn't try and regulate these things.
I absolutely agree with that. One more thing I want to say about this. Did you know that immigration to the US in the past 20 years has been on a steep downward slope, both legal and illegal?
I've heard that. I haven't actually seen it. I'm sure that you can point me towards links.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think that there's another part to it, that this immigration crisis is kind of manufactured.
I'll agree that it is, in certain ways it is manufactured, and both sides are to blame. When I say both sides, I'm referring to the duopoly of Republicans versus Democrats, because those are the people that are in power. And but we do have to recognize that when we see caravans that are coming from Central America across the border, that's not, that's something that's actually happened. Now,
Not,
there are, I'm not saying that that is causing a spike in immigration, but that is certainly something that people can point to, and they can certainly be fearful of over. It's very rational to be scared when you see, say, a group of 5,000 people that have moved across several thousand miles of desert and mountains and other things to get to your country. That's certainly something that you should be aware of. That's certainly something that people can have a rational fear of. It's what
mhm,
we do with that fear. It's what we do with that information that dictates whether or not we are rational.
correct. I agree with you. I think the demonizing is always a sign of something else. You know, if something's going wrong economically in a country, find somebody else to blame or to scapegoat.
Well, political polarization is something that has happened for thousands of years. You can look to the
Yes.
Roman Republic. You can
Oh,
look at
absolutely. Yes.
um, the ancient Greeks before the Romans. You can look at all these things that happened, and um, you can look at what happened with Caesar, and you can see his illustrious career, both as a statesman and as a military commander. And polarization plays a part in these things. And there's nothing new under the sun.
No,
This
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 isn't
this
anything new to me.
you know and the problem is that we have, you know 500, I'll just round up, 550 people who control the lives of over 300 million people.
Hmm.
And we can talk about solutions to that on another occasion, but there are solutions to deal with the intense polarization in America. And if we deal with those things that we'll talk about at some separate time,
Hmm.
the, the polarization that we're dealing with, when you think about people like Nancy Pelosi or Maxine Waters or Donald Trump or Lindsey Graham, those issues can go away with some rather simple, well, simple but not easy solutions
Hmm.
that go back to, again, the U.S. Constitution.
I see what you're getting at, and I really want to have the conversation with you about this topic, and we'll do that next time for sure. This is very interesting. So you just said Lindsey Graham, which happens to be the third um, point.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So anyone who's listening to this knows who Lindsey Graham is. And if they don't, a quick Google search will very quickly help them to realize what a terrible person he is on many, many levels. Lindsey Graham has been in Washington, D.C. for 24 years. He's the senior Republican senator from South Carolina. And this year, I kicked off um, a campaign to run against him in the Republican primary as part of my fusion candidacy as a Libertarian and as a Republican for the U.S. Senate in 2020.
Okay. How do you think? I mean, he's been there for so long, and there's so much money behind him. How do you think you can take him down?
Well, I'm running an extreme campaign on extreme principles. One of the many hashtags that I've started, it's a slogan for my campaign. It's "Make machine guns great again." And that tells people in a lot of ways where I stand on gun rights.
Hmm.
That sends a more powerful message, a polarizing message, about where I stand on gun rights, because every gun law is unconstitutional is not sexy, it's not hip, but it's the truth. But if you say something like "make machine guns great again," it can get across to people who otherwise wouldn't see anything about me, wouldn't care about me. It gets across the fact that I want to repeal the National Firearms Act of 1934, which restricts your ability to own machine guns. I want to repeal the Hughes Amendment of 1986, which has made it so that civilians cannot buy newly built machine guns, and they haven't been able to buy machine guns since 1986. Hughes passed. I want to repeal the Brady Act, which requires you to pass a background check whenever you want to buy a new gun from a federal firearms licensee. I want to fight back against things like 922R, which we touched on briefly. It deals with the number of U.S.-made components in what is otherwise a foreign-made gun.
Right.
And those are the huge things to deal with. Those are the things that gun rights activists, they see those things and they say, wow. Because if you get rid of the NFA, then people can buy suppressors over the counter outside of state laws that might infringe on that right. If you repeal Brady, you have the same issue is solved. I can't remember what the waiting period is in California, but the waiting period in South Carolina is however long it takes for your background check from the NICS system, which the FBI runs, to come back.
Well, I got mine the same day when I went there. I ordered it from a different state because I was very particular about which kind of gun I wanted. But as soon as it arrived, they called me, and I went there to the shop, and they ran the background check on me on their computer right there, and then it took like 10 minutes.
Yeah. So I'm guessing that your permit acted against the mandatory wait that California has, because I think it's like a 10-day wait if you don't have a permit.
I didn't have a permit.
You didn't have
I got a permit that day, yes.
Wow. Strange.
And it was easy because, they check, they have access to background checks, right?
Yes.
You can do that instantly. So they did that immediately, and they saw there's nothing on me, and they're like, okay, here's your gun, and here are some shooting ranges. Please visit them if you're interested, and very nice doing business with you.
Oh, very good. Very good for you.
Yeah, it's not as bad as some people think it is in California. But if I had any kind of a drug record, it would be a completely different story.
Oh, there you go. There you go. But that's what my slogan is. That's one of my slogans.
I like it.
The other things that I'm running on, of course, are abolish welfare. Let's see, in the drug war.
Yeah.
And free market immigration. Those are big ones. But for people who know anything about Graham, they know that Graham is a war hawk. Lindsey Graham hasn't found a war yet that he doesn't want America to be involved in. And
he probably makes some money on it, doesn't he?
He it doesn't matter if it's a Democrat or Republican that's in office, he will find a way to help make that war happen. And it really is disturbing, especially for me as a veteran, to have someone who is so ready to sacrifice American lives, American blood and treasure for fights that we don't have a reason to be a part of. Whether it's in Syria, ISIS is bad, but we didn't really need to be in Syria.
No.
To fight ISIS. I went to Iraq in 2007, 2008, and actually Senator Graham was in Iraq that same year And he came as part of a congressional delegation, and he visited, uh, amongst other places, Baghdad in the Green Zone. And he was still a JAG, a part of the Judge Advocate General Corps for the South Carolina Air National Guard. And he put on his Air Guard uniform for a little while so that he could earn himself a medal while he processed some paperwork in probably one of the safer places in Iraq. So, um, yeah, you look at this record of someone who doesn't respect the Fourth Amendment. You look at this record um, of someone who wants to have endless wars overseas and who has no compassion for people that he's meeting at these migrant detention centers on the border.
None.
And
None.
and you have to say there has to be someone that can replace him. And I'm running an extreme campaign on extreme principles. I tell people I'm 100% pro-gun. Tell people about free market immigration. I tell them about ending the forever war, and a slew of other issues. And I am running a libertarian campaign and a Republican campaign. And I say that because Senator Graham is what we call a rhino, a Republican in name only.
Mm-hmm.
He fights against people like Rand Paul, who had an issue with President Obama's drone strike programs. He calls for things like red flag laws. Red flag laws violate your Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms, by also violating your right to due process by allowing police or family member go to a judge and get a warrant for them to take away your guns on the premise that you are a threat to yourself or to others. They don't take you away and get mental health treatment for you. They don't take you away and lock you in a cage on some charge. They take away your guns, which is a means to protect yourself or to potentially cause harm to others if you go on the offensive. And that, that's the rub. It's not about people's safety. It's about taking away people's rights. And Lindsey Graham, as the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, he wants to, in his words, incentivize the states to pass red flag laws so that the states can do that. And I believe there are 11 states that have passed red flag laws now, and they tend to be blue states. But they're pushing for them even in red states like South Carolina, and it's a danger to everyone. And I'll refer you to Gary Willis, who died the Monday before Election Day. So the election was on Tuesday, and he died on that Monday.
Oh, wow.
When Anne Arundel County, Maryland deputies served a red flag warrant, and when he resisted turning over his guns, when he resisted them arresting him, he went to defend himself, and he was murdered by agents of his county government.
That's horrible.
Because, yeah, so red flag laws kill. They have already killed. And this idea of the federal government granting incentives, incentivizing the states to pass laws, you can look at things like raising the minimum age for drinking alcohol is 21. That was incentivized to the states by threat of withholding federal funds for the interstate highway system.
Right.
And you look at the drug war and grants that are given to different law enforcement agencies in order to encourage them, incentivize them to continue to prosecute the drug war. And it's not hard to imagine what might happen when it's a war on guns, as it were.
Oh, sure. Um, Now, as far as confiscating on the ground of danger to self or others, I actually have experience with calling in quite a few 5150s, which is what you do in mental health.
Mm-hmm.
When you, as a professional, can assess that this person is about to kill somebody or kill themselves, right? And they don't get arrested. They get taken to a mental hospital where they're evaluated. It's usually a 72-hour hold. And it does sound invasive, but it's usually helpful because that person just needs, some professionals to talk to, sometimes some drugs. They, of course, have to consent to the drugs, but
Yeah.
what I can understand, if you see somebody who's on the verge of shooting up a mall or something, that's you got to do that. You got to help them, and help is more important than disable them. Help them, and
Yeah.
and that's what we've done. But taking away somebody's gun is not going to do that. That's
No.
not. No, no. It's just a very backward way to deal with it, and also not helpful to the individual who might be experiencing something psychologically difficult. So that's how I see it. But that's my training in the field that colors how I look at it.
No, I agree with the idea of people getting help. I agree with you know um, detaining someone if there is a real reason to arrest someone or detain someone or to um, get them mental health services, whatever the case may be. I
Mm-hmm.
can understand that, but as we discussed, that's not what's happening with red flag laws. What's
Right,
happening is
exactly.
you're removing a tool that someone might use. Um, and if you look at statistics for homicides and suicides in parts of the world where they have very strict gun control, what happens is instead, if people don't have access to guns, then they move on to, say, bladed weapons when it comes to harming others. If it's a case of suicide, people, instead of using guns, they might use something like pesticides. That's actually particularly popular, I believe, in um, Southeast Asia. I believe South Korea, maybe Japan. Those are very popular um, to use various pesticides instead of using a gun because, again, they have a very restrictive set of laws when it comes to firearms.
I mean, somebody can also drink bleach.
Yeah, they can find something to harm themselves, and they can if they mean to harm someone else, there are ways that you can poison people without um, making it completely obvious. There are ways that they can harm people without making it obvious to the person being poisoned. It might be more obvious to someone who's doing, say, autopsy or some other work, but it's not completely obvious to the person who's partaking in whatever it is. And so, if you're removing something that they're going to use, but you're not removing the person who you're concerned is going to do harm, you're not really you're not really addressing the issue. You're not trying to help the person, and that's part of the issue. You're just looking to infringe on someone's rights.
Right. Right. It's under the guise of trying to help, but it's not helpful at all in any way.
nailed it.
Mhm. So what else do you want to say about Lindsey Graham? I mean, I think pretty much everybody who's going to listen to our podcast knows most of the ways in which he's vile. Are there some particular South Carolina things that maybe some people have not heard about that you might know that he's done?
Well, what I'll say is this: he has a history of pushing for gun control. He talked about red flag laws in March of 2019. He talked about red flag laws in 2017. He encouraged President Trump to push forward with what became the bump stock ban. He, while President Obama was still president, I believe it was in 2015, he was pushing for no fly, no buy, which is the idea that if someone appears on the no fly list, then they can't buy firearms.
Wow.
From a federal firearms licensee, they've become a prohibited person. Fortunately, that didn't pass. He was a part of the Fix NICS bill, which unfortunately did pass. But he has this long history of fighting against the natural right to keep and bear arms. And for anyone who's listening in South Carolina, in particular, people are pointing to two things, and they're saying that Senator Graham has changed. And I tell people he hasn't changed. They point to the death of John McCain and Graham supposedly suddenly having a backbone, having a spine, and standing up for himself and standing up for things that people in South Carolina want. And then they point to the Kavanaugh hearing, and they point to the end of the Kavanaugh hearing where Senator Graham exploded across the Judiciary Committee, full of anger and vitriol and a little bit of rage. And I tell people that even though his official campaign kicked off in March of 2019, his unofficial campaign kicked off at the Kavanaugh hearing right there in the Judiciary Committee. And what Senator Graham does is once he gets reelected, so he will go and he will act and he will do whatever he wants until he gets to about a year and a half to 2 years out from his reelection. And then suddenly he becomes this constitutional conservative who represents the people of South Carolina. And people fall for this act over and over. And they say, I want to give him a second chance. I want to believe in Lindsey Graham. And what ends up happening is he betrays them as soon as he's reelected. So don't fall for the act. Vote for me in June so you don't have to vote for Lindsey again in November.
I am absolutely rooting for you to take him down, and I will do whatever is in my power to help you.
Well, thank you, ma'am. Can we take just one brief break real quick?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, we're back online now. Our next topic is something that you wanted to tell us about a fire station being built in your town.
Yes, so my small town of North Augusta, South Carolina, has less than 25,000 people. And we need a new public safety headquarters for various reasons. And we need a new fire station because as the city has grown, there are developments, there are neighborhoods that are have a longer response time. And with, different charts that you look at, the longer it takes you to get to a home, the less likely it is that you're going to be able to stop the fire and save the home. And so for the last few years, the city of North Augusta has been building and trying to build new fire stations in different locations. And the latest one they want to build is on a historic property in the one historic neighborhood overlay district in North Augusta. And it's one of, I believe, 12 districts total, or maybe it's 11 total. And this small town with a lot of history for, a small town in South Carolina. On this property, they built what was called the Palmetto Lodge, and later on it was called Seven Gables. This Tudor style, huge, home that also had a restaurant, a bar, and other things that helped to serve as one of those focal points in a community. People could look to and they could say, that's a part of our community. Well, sometime in the last 15 years, while I was stationed in North Carolina in the Marines, that building burned down, and it was tragic, and it had a real impact on the community. And a couple years ago, this property that had sat vacant for several years afterwards was purchased by a gentleman who is friends with the city administrator. And 18 months later, the city is looking for a place to build a fire station, and that gentleman made double his money when he sold it to the city of North Augusta for $850,000.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And
that's it?
$850,000 for 4 acres in a city in a historic district. And it's, for a town of less than 25,000 people, that's an exorbitant amount of money. It's not the worst crime that my city has committed. That's a ballpark that they built on a tax, some sort of tax associated bond.
I mean, that would buy you a 2-bedroom condo in San Diego.
Well, that's San Diego, California. That's not North Augusta, South Carolina.
Right.
My house costs far less than that. And I've got a 4-bedroom, 3-bath on a half-acre lot. Anyway, so
I'm envious.
Yeah. Well, there are good things and bad things about living in the city. There are good things and bad things about living in.
Yeah, I don't see it as an either or. I was just making a joke, but yeah.
No, you're good. I'm just in robot mode right now because this is something that's very personal to me.
All right.
And the city, they have to have 3 votes that pass in order to build this fire station. And for the last couple of years, people have been fighting the city on building this fire station here because the fire station, which is going to be the smaller of the buildings, they're going to build a public safety headquarters, and then they want to build this fire station. Before that, the fire station would dwarf any of the historic homes in the district because the district is restricted to homes no larger than 3,000 square feet. With exemptions and variances that can be sought and rejected by the city council. And what they plan to do is build a structure that is almost 9 times what the ordinances allow just for the fire station, and then the public safety headquarters would be twice again that. And so you're looking at dwarfing a historic home and other historic homes, completely destroying the property values. And also, given where it is, the property is historic. There are some famous writers, famous for us, that lived there, that wrote books there, that sort of thing, wrote poetry there. And
Oh.
Go ahead.
No, I'm just absorbing what you're saying. I'm having an emotional reaction to this.
Yeah, so that's exactly what's happened, is you have this emotional reaction to that. And then, of course, there's the safety factor of turning out from this property. This property sits on the top of a hill, and there is a thoroughfare that goes through there that's got 4 lanes of traffic and a center lane for turning. And then you have this 1-lane road that runs on the other side of the property on both sides. You've got a 1-lane road called Observatory and a 1-lane road called Butler. And if you turn from anywhere on that property with a small car, you have a high chance of getting an accident. If you take and you turn that into a ladder truck, to go and fight a fire, it's only going to get worse. And there was a lack of due diligence when the city bought this property. And to just give you an idea of what it is, so it's zoned for residential. It's in this historic overlay district. And the city administrator, when asked, how difficult it's going to be to rezone the property, he said that he assumed that just because the city had bought the property, that it automatically rezoned to P for public. And when the property is zoned P for public, the city can do whatever they want. Most of their ordinances can just go out the window. They don't have to worry about those things. And what's happened instead is they've been fighting citizenry. There's about 60 people who live in that district, but there are hundreds, thousands of people actually that live outside of the district that are worried about the potential for 7 petty tyrants to ruin their own neighborhood and to ruin the lives of their neighbors and to cause more accidents, potentially deaths, at what's the second most dangerous intersection in our small town of less than 25,000 people.
Yeah.
So on Monday night, they were supposed to have the third and final vote on building the fire station on that property. And this was actually an issue in our municipal elections in April, was it May? Because what happened is you had this upstart party who ran against the Republican establishment in the city. And this is getting to this idea of Democrats and Republicans, they need to be kept in check by each other. If you have Republicans in power, the Republican principles suddenly go out the door. If you have Democrats in power, then they just go and they act as corrupt as they accuse Republicans of being. And so having a balance, having some other political party to balance out
Yes.
party in power helps with keeping government in line with the governed. And so it wasn't the Democratic Party that decided to run against the Republican Party in the municipal election. It was the Constitution Party, which didn't exist in North Augusta.
Right. Yes, I've read about them, and I disagree with a lot of their stances. I do.
Yeah, I disagree with a lot of their stances too, but I understand where they're coming from. They don't adhere to the Constitution as much as they think they do. And so
I agree on that too. Yep.
So the Constitution Party was started up in North Augusta before the elections, and then they ran hard for about a month and a half leading up to the election. And they got within a few percentage points of winning. And that shook people up, because this party that didn't exist before in a formal organization was started up by people from all parts of the city. And their big issue was the fire station and a ballpark that we don't have time to talk about tonight. But
right.
This third and final vote, the city council, they showed up for their executive session.
That's pretty amazing. This makes me think about ballot access laws. And I don't know what they're like in South Carolina. I know that in some states, in the South. Like Tennessee is the worst, from what I've read. I've read the requirements and how,
Yeah.
how how do we challenge this?
Well, fortunately, here in South Carolina, we have some of the best ballot access laws.
Oh, good.
So all you have to do is you have to have a political party at the state level.
Right.
And then beyond that, in order to run for a local office, not for a state level office like, say, governor, not for federal office like Senate, House, President, you have to have a local party. And the easiest way to do that in South Carolina is at the county level. So you have the Aiken County Libertarian Party. And when you have the Aiken County Libertarian Party, then someone who lives inside Aiken County can then run for an office who the district is within Aiken County, or they can run for a municipal election. And that's what the Constitution Party did. They had a state level Constitution Party before, and they've
Okay.
run national level candidates. And you have to run a national level candidate, or you have to run a statewide candidate, is really what it is. Someone who can be voted on in every county in South Carolina. You have to do that every, I can't remember if it's 4 years, 6 years. It's within a 10-year time frame. And so the Constitution Party continues to do that. So the Constitution Party continues to have ballot access because of that. And then on the local level, all they have to do is organize a local party they have to organize a local party, and then every 2 years after they've organized that party, they have to reorganize it. And when they've done that, they maintain their legality, they maintain ballot access, and in some cases, just to give you an idea of what it's like in South Carolina,
Mhm.
there are counties where they have one member for the Libertarian Party, or they have two members of the Libertarian Party, a handful, and we're able to maintain that because, as bad as it may be in certain ways, it's not as bad as, say, Tennessee, where I think that every few years they have to get 10,000 signatures in order to be recognized as a valid party,
Right.
whereas
It's I think it's 28,000. I could be wrong on my number, but yeah, it's something like that.
yeah, it's either that or they have to get a certain percentage of the vote, and
Right.
that if they get a certain percentage of the vote in probably a statewide election, then what happens is the number of people that they need to petition in order to maintain ballot access is much smaller. That's why Republicans and Democrats get something like less than 50, have to
Mhm.
get 50 or less signatures. I
Right.
can't remember the exact number because I don't have to worry about it because it's
Yeah,
in
I mean,
the,
I have all that saved, but I'm not gonna look it up right now. But
yeah,
yeah, it's extremely unfair. That's just the best way to put it.
yeah, that's the nicest way of putting it. But
Yeah, I'm trying to be
so,
polite.
so the Constitution Party ran against the fire station being built on that property. They ran against the ballpark and everything that was associated with it.
Hmm.
Um, but they didn't run against building a fire station. And no one who is protesting the fire station is protesting building a fire station. No one's protesting building a new public safety headquarters
A fire station. Yeah, exactly.
because there because there are very real concerns, about people's safety, officer safety at the public safety headquarters because there's black mold, things like that. Their
Right.
concern, their concern is the way that the property was bought. In fact, there was no due diligence in in ascertaining whether or not it would be a viable property to try and build out there, and what they would have to do in order to build there, including rezoning to public.
Right.
And they held off on actually the third vote to finalize building the fire station. They did that Monday. They held off on that vote, but they passed an amendment to city code that will allow them now, and this violates state law, so there will be attorneys involved at some point to sue the city again, because they're already being sued for lack of transparency. But there will be lawyers involved because they are allowing themselves power to go and rezone an area to public just because the city has bought the property.
Right.
And when they do that, they're also allowing themselves to violate the development code that they created and voted on just a few years ago. So the city is exempting itself from ordinances that it would require private individuals to adhere to. They're not granting variances to private businesses to expand their business in similar situations, which there was a gentleman who has a pest control business. He wanted to build I believe it was a 10,000 square foot business building in addition to what he already had. He is in a residential neighborhood, but there are commercial properties around him, including his own. And the city voted against him being able to expand because it was going to be something like 3 times beyond the limit when it came to square footage of property. And the hypocrisy there is another aspect of why people are not trusting the city government. The lack of transparency and other issues. And we're lucky in that we actually have partisan elections in this municipality because most South Carolina municipal elections are nonpartisan. And the city has decided to be partisan for all this time, but with the challenge from the Constitution Party getting within a few points of the Constitution Party getting 3 seats on the 7-seat mayor city council government, there was talk shortly after the election of going to nonpartisan elections. And for those of you listening that live in an area with partisan elections, you should be grateful to have partisan elections, because even if you have just Republicans running against Democrats and never being able to win, they at least provide an option, a real option, as opposed to, say, a primary where the only people who can, an election where the only people who can show up are Democrats, or the only people who can show up are Republicans, as the case may be.
Right.
It allows for accountability on
Right.
a certain level.
Accountability is important. Now, zoning laws is something that I usually get into arguments with some of my more left-leaning libertarian friends. And I bring up, as a property owner, as a real estate owner, I bring up arguments such as, if somebody decides to build a brick factory right across my building and make noise all day long, I'm not gonna want that, because it's gonna be loud and it's going to not only annoy me with the noise, but it's also going to bring down the property value of my home, which I worked very hard to buy. And for some reason, that argument doesn't stand with them. They're like, oh, well, you're an elitist. And I'm like, no, I think I'm just using common sense here. What do you think?
Well, I don't know if it's common sense, but I will say that common sense is not a common virtue.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And the thing is that I wouldn't want to build a home by an airport, not a major airport. I know that there are people that in places like Florida, you'll have homes that have, this is like super rich people that have pilot's licenses. They'll have homes and there'll be a hangar, kind of a hangar garage that they land their plane at this small regional airport, local town airport, and then they will pilot their plane into their little hangar, slash garage. But that's different from someone who wants to go by, say, an international airport. I don't want to be under, all those loud planes as they're flying in or flying out. I don't want to deal with the fumes and all those other issues.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to have a negative impact on property values. It's kind of like building a home by a railroad crossing, or near railroad period, is going to negatively impact your property values. Now, there can be times where having that railroad passing through your property, passing by your property, has a positive impact. But generally, that's for people who, it's not their private residence. It's, say, it's a farm, or it's a power plant, or some other factory, some other private means of production that they want to deal with the scale of getting materials in or getting materials out that a railroad affords, versus just getting UPS or FedEx or some other private freight company to move your product.
Right. Right. And actually the airport and the train are just a few blocks away from me. Well, the airport is probably a 10-minute drive, but yeah, the train is here, and the trolley and the tram and all of that. I don't hear them, but they're here. And also the bay with the ships. None of that bothers me. What would bother me though is if somebody wants to build something that's going to be a noise nuisance right next door to me, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm already here, so they're infringing into the community who's already established here.
Yeah. Yeah. And, because you were there first, you should have, first right of refusal, I think is
Yes.
what people call it.
Yes. And we do.
Good. Because, that's why I agree with this idea of zoning, and that's why this idea of the fire station and the amendment to city code that they passed is frightening, because I live at the end of the road. It's not even a cul-de-sac. It's just not even a roundabout. It's the end of the road. And there are, well, it's just, I live at the end of the road in a neighborhood in the city.
Okay.
And there's barely enough room to turn around, but there is enough room to turn around. But I have a neighbor across the street from me.
Mm-hmm.
Beside his house is an empty lot that's owned by the guy who lives across the street from that lot. Those are both corner lots. And then between me and the guy who owns that empty lot is a third house. Now, the city, if they wanted to, because that house is for sale right now, they could buy it for what the property owners are asking for it. They could demolish it. And because of this amendment that they passed to the city code, they can build whatever they want there. They could build a small dump. They could build a police substation. They could build a barracks. They could build whatever they want to build there that the city needs to build there. And there's nothing that I could say against it. And in the process of rezoning that property, my property may get rezoned, at the periphery, to give them plenty of space. I may lose some of my property through eminent domain, because they may say, well, we need an easement. Yes, we need an easement because we bought this house here, and there's a house behind it, and there are two roads, and we need to connect these. And so we're going to seize, we're going to, through eminent domain, buy the space between your house, like the actual brick wall, the physical structure of your house, and the, say, 15, 20 feet that you have, and we're going to build an easement through there so that our vehicles can go through there. And they can do that. And it's totally legal
Yeah.
until it gets challenged in court, because they don't have that authority. But
No.
again, getting back to Wickard versus Filborn with the federal government in 1942, the federal government granted itself powers through that court case. My city government has done something similar just on Monday. They've granted themselves powers, and it's going to be challenged in court, because they're already being challenged on things like transparency. They're going to be challenged on this in court. And every home in my small town is in danger now of something like that happening. And it's just a little bit more real for me because, again, my neighbor's home is for sale. And hey, if they need it, they'll buy properties, they'll use eminent domain to buy other properties and then build whatever it is that they need to build.
That sounds wow. Wow. I'm so sorry to hear this. And I've heard some things from some of my friends in Texas about the eminent domain. I'm pretty sure this whole wall thing is not going to happen, but it was already requested of people to just give up their properties that they've lived on their whole lives, and because it's for the wall. There's a big uproar about it, and it's completely understandable. I'm on their side. This is wrong. This is just wrong.
Yeah, eminent domain is a power that was granted to the federal government through the Constitution.
Right, I know.
In the beginning, and I think that we need to take that power back from the government. And I think that we need to stop it from being abused, because that's what's happening, not
Yeah.
just by the federal government, but like I said, municipal governments, county governments, state governments, and something else needs to happen with all of that is the federal government, and this is more relevant to you because you live out in California, you live out west. You look at a map of federal lands,
Mm-hmm.
um, and most of them are in the western United States, and most of them are in fairly inhospitable places, in the Southwest, parts of California, Nevada, so on and so forth. There are the places where they're not, but that's the easiest place to point to. The federal government shouldn't own those lands. And if you look at the history of the United States, those lands should have, if they had followed, tradition and what had happened before, those lands that belonged to the federal government, when territories became states, they should have received those lands at some point in time. Any excess lands should have gone to the state governments. Those state governments should have liquidated those lands, in other words, sold those lands to private individuals.
Correct.
There's no reason for the federal government to own all of this land. I'm not debating whether or not the federal government can own anything. I'm saying that the scale that the federal government owns land is entirely out of proportion from what it should be. And
Well,
you know,
even when you own a home or a piece of land, you don't completely own it because you have to pay taxes.
that's government sanctioned rent, because the person who actually owns the property is your government.
Yeah.
And what we need to return to, I'm going to use a term you may or may not be familiar with. We need to return to a system of allodial titles, because what happened when we had allodial titles in the past, and they've tried to bring it back in a few places, like Nevada did it for a couple of years, but not really. When you purchased something with an allodial title, that meant that you owned that until you decided to sell it. It meant that you
Right.
owned it until you gave it to someone else or until a child inherited it. And you bought something once and it was yours forever.
Right.
But now we have this massive system of taxation that every libertarian knows is completely horrendous and is theft.
It absolutely is theft.
And
I
so what we have,
don't like saying that thing, because taxation is theft. It's just become a cliche, you know. But it is. I
it
know.
is, it is because, if you, like, if I were to pay off my home today, which I'm not in a state to do, but if I were to pay it off today, at the end of the year, the beginning of next year, I will receive a bill from the county tax man. And if I don't pay that bill in time for the tax assessment, it's only a few $100s, but it's for my property. It's for my ability to have my property here.
Right.
And
What's the percentage rate for real estate tax per year?
the it varies in South Carolina, and I'm not sure exactly what it is on my own home right now, because getting into something we'll discuss another time, there was a bond that was taken out that over the course of 30 years, it is either, if you take the mayor's estimate, it's $69 million right now, or it's up to $140 million that the city government owes. Now, because it's a special tax, it's a special tax district, it only becomes a debt to the city, legally speaking, if the tax district does not make enough money for the city.
Oh,
But
right, of
yeah,
course. Yes.
but in order to help finance that and other city debt, they added new taxes. We have different mill rate. We have different millage rates for different homes. If you have kids and they're in school, you pay a different tax rate versus someone who doesn't. And it can be rather excessive. It can get to a point where I've got a friend who lives in Lexington County, which is near the state capital. It's in the center of the state, and it's possible for someone who rents a property to charge $1,000 a month to the renter and to not turn a profit, not because they're greedy, but because of the rate of taxation, the maintenance of the property, and well, actually, that doesn't even take into account maintenance. That takes into account taxation, and it takes into account their mortgage. That's it. $1,000 a month, not turn a profit, and not do any maintenance. And that's ridiculous. And that's for like a mid-size American home, a couple bedrooms, a couple baths, nothing fancy. And it's possible to not turn a profit. It's possible to actually end up paying, in the long term, paying for someone to rent your property for 6 months, paying someone to rent your property for a year. Because you don't get the same tax write-offs that you do if you live there and you have kids. So,
Okay, so this makes me think about something else. I think some people are not aware of this, but there's a marriage penalty, tax-wise, if you don't have kids.
yes. Yes, because there's, I believe it's a $5,000, I can't remember if it's a tax credit. It's $5,000 that gets credited to you in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
Out your taxes. It's $5,000 per child.
Right.
And the other thing with that, also, if you look at everything, you have got all of these brackets, and it can get to a point where you get to be too successful. It doesn't matter if you've got kids. It doesn't matter if if you own your home outright, if you have debt, if you have student loan debt, for instance, you have all these things. that are negative things for you as a person, what ends up happening is those things allow you to earn more money. Because what will end up happening in the wonky bonky system of incentives and disincentives that is the US tax system, you are discouraged from owning your home outright. You are discouraged from choosing not to have children at a certain point, because tax incentives, tax breaks go away. If you have $150,000 worth of debt that is just your home, that counts towards your taxes in certain jurisdictions. If you have student loan debt, that counts towards your taxes. So if you do everything right, like say Dave Ramsey, and you live without debt, you live without credit cards, you own your home, you buy used cars, you pay cash, that sort of thing, what ends up happening is
I
you pay,
actually do all of those things.
yeah, you pay extra to live in America. And the thing that's really disgusting about the income tax, and some people know this, some people don't realize this, but the 16th Amendment that authorizes the income tax, there's a question about its constitutionality. There's a question about whether it actually passed in its final form the way that it should have. But if you look at the actual income tax itself, it dates back to the First World War, the Great War, as it used to be known. And it was meant to be a temporary tax to help pay for the war effort. And it was meant to only impact like the top 1%. And it impacts everyone today. And it's not temporary. We have to fight to get our money, to hang on to our money. And you look at other forms of taxation, like property taxes, which is what we're talking about now. And what ends up happening is it gives government power to do things government was never authorized to do. You know, police departments are not constitutionally authorized law enforcement. They're not constitutional officers, as some people might call it in government. The only constitutional law enforcement officer in the United States is a sheriff.
Right.
If you get back,
that's where I had to get my concealed carry license, sheriff.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but we need to end the system of tax slavery. We need to end the system of you going and working and slaving away, because that's what it is. Because what ends up happening is when you earn income in this country, your money, you don't get paid directly by your boss. You get paid by your boss after taxes are taken out. And maybe a very, very small portion of taxes, but some taxes are taken out. Unless you're paid cash, unless you're paid directly, which most employers don't do these days, your money, Uncle Sam gets a portion. In your case, the state of California gets a portion. And then you get your money. So the first second that you start working, doesn't matter if you're salaried, doesn't matter if you get paid hourly, the first second, the first hour, it belongs to someone else. That is literally slavery. It's not in the fields getting whipped. It's not picking cotton or anything crazy like that, but it is still slavery. And
it is.
We have to end the current system of taxation. And we have to return to something that is more reasonable and that honestly will allow us to have a more reasonable form of governance. Will actually allow the governed to dictate government. We have to return to a system of user fees.
Correct. So you know, the demographic of people who get taxed the worst are people who make somewhere between $20,000 and $35,000, which is, you know, I mean, depending on the state, but it's just really just enough to get by, if you think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. It depending on where you live,
They don't have any write-offs. They don't have any interest write-offs. They don't have any mortgage write-offs because they're renters. These are just people just trying to get somewhere in life, and they can't because they're taxed. It's about 30% of their paychecks get taken out.
Yeah. And when you look at it, when you look at everything that's going on, it makes it more difficult for those people to be able to um, find somewhere else to live, to find a job somewhere else,
Right.
because so much of their income is going into taxes. It's going into
Just trying
living
to
wherever they are,
survive.
just scraping by. And what ends up happening is anyone below that is able to go to the government for assistance and
Right.
potentially get stranded on the welfare cliff. And anyone above that has the ability to find write-offs. They have the ability to possibly itemize. They have the ability to have purchased a home and use that to offset their taxation.
Right.
And so we're punishing people who, honestly, no one should be punished for taxation, but we're punishing the people that it makes the least amount of sense to punish. And what we should be doing, like I said, is returning to a system of user fees. And the other thing with that is, with going to a system of user fees, it opens up the possibility of privatization of services. For instance, people argue against privatization of police force, and I have actually done it in the past. But let me build an argument for you.
Okay.
So in San Diego, you have a sheriff, I'm guessing,
Yes.
at some level. You may not deal with deputies on a regular basis, but you have a sheriff. Do you have a police department in San Diego?
Yeah, it's a block away from me, and I have worked with the PERT team many
Hmm.
times.
Okay.
Yep.
Um, so let me ask you this: do you know people who live in San Diego who also pay for security services?
I
Like
mean,
it could be.
our
It,
HOA just hired a security guard for the door. So, okay. Yes.
okay. Yeah. So that is an example of an easy way for us, through a system of user fees, to return to the ability to have um, choice in the market. Because around here, we have, in my city, we have to deal with the county because, of course, we live in the county. We have to deal with the police department. And of course, we have to deal with private security services. Those private
Mhm.
security services, they aren't, they're not coming after me. They're not coming after you or anything like that. But what they do is they do the same things that deputy sheriffs do. They do the same things that police do. They do property checks, where they go to make sure that a property is safe and secure. They respond to calls that that people calling. There's an alarm that goes off. Well, the call goes out, the police are notified, fire is notified when appropriate, and the security service, with their car, their truck, whatever the case may be, and an unarmed or potentially an armed officer dispatched to that area. There's no reason why we can't do something similar with all of our services. You decide who you want to provide your service in the
Right.
form of law enforcement. They all have the same book of rules that they work with, but what ends up happening is, when you need help, well, maybe you call ADT, maybe you call Securitas, maybe you call San Diego County, maybe you call uh, City of San Diego, whatever the case may be.
I
And
have these people's personal cell numbers in my phone because I've worked with them. So I just, if something happens, I know who to call. I know how to call one of my friends.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and it makes a lot of sense. And the other thing with all of that is that it provides choice. So instead of you having to worry about if San Diego, whether city or county, law enforcement is going to get there in time, you just call. Maybe you call a central number if you don't have someone that you can.
You mean my neighbor in my building who's a police officer? I can call him anytime.
Well, there you go. Whatever
Yeah.
the case may be. But the idea is that you can do something other than just have to rely on the
Right.
county, have to rely on the city, and have that money stolen from you. And if you go to a system of user fees and you allow competition, you also remove the justification that a lot of people use when they fight against user fees, when they fight against these things. So,
Well, I'm just thinking, I think that educating people is so important. You know, I see a lot of this stuff about cops are pigs and all the stuff. And you know what? Yeah, a lot of them are, but not all of them are. And just just don't do the same thing that you whine against about other demographics of people. You know, it's just say everybody who's based on their profession is a terrible person. What happened? One. Hello, everyone. We are back here with David Weikle, and the next topic that we want to talk about is Veteran Affairs, or VA, as I usually refer to. There have been a lot of complaints. There have been some scandals about how things have been handled, and I would really like to hear from an expert about what goes on with the system and what might be some possible solutions to fix it.
well, I'm far from being an expert on the VA, but what I am is a patient at the VA, and I am in the system, and I've been there, and I've seen with my own two eyes. So I have anecdotal evidence for myself, and then I've heard from other veterans what the system is like, and then you can beyond that, you can look at the actual numbers that are released about individual hospitals versus the entire VA system. So, what would you like to know about specifically, Anna?
What I would like to know about, now there was this recent bill signed that veterans would be able to receive benefits outside of VA hospitals, but still be covered by the the insurance that they have.
Yes. So you're referring to the choice program, what's commonly called the choice program, the Veterans Choice Program, and that's been around for several years. And it's there are good things about the choice program, and there are bad things about the choice program. And the basic concept behind the choice program is that if the VA will not see you within a certain time frame for whatever condition that you're suffering from that needs to be treated, or if you need, in some cases, like imaging services, things like that, things that are needed as part of your plan of care, the VA has a system in place where they will send you out to an outside facility, whether that is a hospital nearby, or if it's a doctor's office, maybe a specialty clinic, that sort of thing, they will send in a referral, and then through the choice program, you're able to set up appointments and then to go and be treated.
Okay, well, that sounds reasonable.
Yes. However, like any government program, it has had some hiccups. At the beginning of things, they were very accepting of patients because there was this huge backlog across the country. And some facilities were worse than others, but in certain instances, you had veterans that were on unofficial waiting lists where they would wait for 3 months or longer. And the administrators within the VA had figured out some sort of way in order to set it up so that someone would be on this unofficial waiting list, and it might be something like they would schedule an appointment. At some point, they would cancel that. They had all sorts of tricks in order to make these things happen so that they could give themselves 90 days. And in one case, I think they had up to 180 days at one particularly bad facility. And so there were veterans that were literally dying from a lack of care.
That's horrible.
It is horrible, especially when you consider the fact that in some cases, the only reason that veterans go to the VA is because they don't have any other means of health care. Because you have people that have mental health conditions that can sometimes prohibit them from being able to be a functional member of society. And beyond that, being able to actually be in society. There's an extremely high homelessness rate amongst veterans in the United States.
I know.
And especially when you consider the fact that we've been at war for, in Afghanistan, 18 years.
Yeah.
And ongoing conflicts in other places since then, and a few from before then. And so when you take all that into account, it makes sense that you're going to have millions and millions of people who have some mental health issues, whether it's extreme PTSD to the point where they aren't able to socialize, they're not able to work in any environment, and so they end up homeless. They end up not being able to support themselves, not being able to get any sort of job or any sort of career.
You can't function.
They can't function, and because of that, some of us, a lot of us have been on the bottom of the ladder before. We've been at that point where, okay, I can't afford healthcare because I don't make enough with this job that I have. But you work your way up to a point where, hey, I could buy healthcare, but it makes more sense for me to spend that money on something else.
Right.
Well, a lot of veterans aren't even able to hold down that minimum wage job that you're worried about, where you're at, where you can't even afford basic health care. And so they end up going to a place that veterans frankly hate and despise, and in some cases are scared to go to because of the terrible record that VA hospitals and VA clinics have.
This is just horrible to think about.
Yeah.
I mean, aside from, you probably agree with me that we need to end all of these wars.
Oh, absolutely. We need to end all the wars.
Yes.
We need to end the forever war
Yes.
that we're engaged in, and beyond that.
Beyond that, though, the people who have already participated for whatever reason that they signed up for the military, they are back now. They are here, and they were promised to be taken care of. And we need to somehow deliver on that promise, because it's just not right. So what can we do? What do you think we can do as a society, not as a government?
Yeah. Well, we have to do a couple of things. First off, this is crucial. We have to stop creating uh, more dead troops, and we have to stop creating more wounded veterans. And how we do that, how we do that is returning to constitutional principles. We return to what we find in the U.S. Constitution, and we're not supposed to have a standing army in this country. The federal government is not supposed to have a standing army, and that's why every 2 years they're supposed to receive a new budget, because they're not supposed to allocate funds for a standing army for more than 2 years. So we have to end federal military service, except for actual wars. And beyond that, we have to, these are radical things that we're talking about here. We have to return to a system of formal and informal militias within the states, much like they had in the 18th and the 19th centuries.
Okay.
And so, radical thinking here, this is not going to happen overnight, but if you go back to this idea of not having a federal military service, no Army, no Navy, no Marine Corps, and I'm a Marine, I'm proud of my service, no Air Force, and what you have at that point is the states then have to assume those responsibilities. And with, say, the National Guard serves as the formal militia of the various states at this point in time. Instead of having the National Guard um, go out and take care of people when there's a hurricane or tornado or blackout or something like that, the National Guard should probably be scaled down to a much smaller force in each of the states, and then they should be acting as trainers for the informal militias in the states. And the informal militia is you, it's me, it's anyone who
Yes.
is a free person in the United States who can bear arms. And if you, uh, for say moral reasons, don't want to bear arms, you are still a part of the militia. And while you might not bear arms because you have objections to that, or in this case moral reasons, what you can do is you can receive um, training as a combat medic or a corpsman, which is the Navy and Marine Corps' equivalent of a medic. And with that training, you then have the ability to help people out, much like the National Guard does now. But beyond that, if there was some sort of foreign invasion, the informal militia would outnumber the formal militia. The informal militia would have to arm itself. It would have to make sure that it has arms and training and everything that's necessary in order to repel an enemy force. And again, these are radical things that we're talking about.
This is radical, and this is very, very libertarian, and I very much agree with this. I like this.
And by doing that, yeah, and by doing these things, we don't have to worry about the next war.
No.
Because if we eliminate federal military service, if the federal government tries to draw an army out, and the states say, no, we're not going to send our militia out to assist in this war overseas, then the federal government will not be able to have an army to send to, say, Iran.
Right. They wouldn't. And to put a simple word to it, it's decentralizing.
Yes, it's decentralization and localization of power.
Yes.
And with this, also getting back to the informal militia and the formal militia, um, in the States, you then have the ability to still repel invaders and getting, to other things that I've talked about, make machine guns great again. Every gun law is unconstitutional. Well, guess what? My neighbor might decide that he wants to have a belt-fed machine gun, and he wants to have, suppressors for his long-range rifles or whatever he needs, and he can buy those things because the Second Amendment recognizes that the individual has the right to bear those arms and to use those arms in defense of the state and in defense of their individual person.
Right. Yeah, I agree with all of that. Some people have thought that I'm pro gun control, and I never have been. It's because I've said things like, okay, well, maybe, if we change this particular law, because I think I'm more pragmatic in that way, because I don't expect things to change overnight. So I try to change the wording in laws locally, for example. So it's kind of a difficult thing to do, because there seems to be two very opposing sides that are both radical. There's the ban all guns, and then there's the let's have everybody, including 5-year-olds, have machine guns, which I don't think is right either. I mean, I don't think that a 5-year-old with a Kalashnikov is a good idea. Do you?
No, but I think that it gets kind of into the idea of, does that 5-year-old have all the rights of an adult citizen? Does that 5-year-old get to vote? No, they don't. Does
No.
that 5-year-old get to dictate everything that they eat? Does that 5-year-old get to dictate a number of other things? And the fact of the matter is that they don't. And the reason that they don't get to do those things is because they are under the care of adults.
Right.
Hopefully their parents, hopefully a mother and
Yeah,
a father.
or foster parents, or whatever,
Yeah.
whatever situation it is.
Yeah. And so those people, whoever they are, that are caring for that child, they have a responsibility to protect them. The same way that I have a responsibility to protect my own son from certain things. That doesn't mean that he doesn't have rights. It just means that because he doesn't receive he's not fully responsible for the things that he does,
Right.
because he's under my care, he doesn't have all of his rights to the fullest extent possible.
Right.
But that being said, my 5-year-old son is being taught how to use guns already. He has a BB gun that my father got him, and he is learning to shoot that.
Okay.
And he's learning these things now in a safe environment with people who love him, people who care about him, people who will transition him from using a little lever action BB gun or Red Ryder up to something with more oomph, until it gets to the point where he is using a Kalashnikov or a Stoner pattern rifle, an AR-15, an M4,
Right.
something to that effect.
Right.
And that's not going to happen overnight.
No.
And he isn't fully responsible for the things that he does. Now, he may receive certain, we call them grumpy consequences, if he goes and he does certain things, but we're not going to hold him to the same standards that we would an 18-year-old.
Right. Of course. So just a quick sideway here. As far as there's been some contention about age of consent laws that some libertarians have been perceived negatively for. And it's kind of a contentious topic. But my thoughts on that, I will begin.
Okay.
If you consider the fact that a human brain is not even completely formed until about 25 years old of age, you know, there's a whole thing, there's this whole huge chart in mental health, right? About consent, as far as, you know, relationship consent. You know, a 17-year-old and a 17-year-old is one thing. A 17-year-old and a 40-year-old is another thing. And it's looked at differently for reason of differentiation of power. So I think that some of the rhetoric that I hear about this, and some of it is from friends that I otherwise very much respect, is that I don't think they're getting the picture, because a child cannot consent. A child cannot consent. Two children can possibly, two children, let's say, you know, 16 or 17-year-olds, that's a different story. But a child who's 16 with a much older person, that's not consent. That's a power dynamic that's most likely, if not absolutely likely, to harm the child. What do you think about this?
Well, I think that um, that people can certainly have discussions about age of consent laws if they want to. But I kind of take what you say, and I understand it, and I agree with it for the most part. I agree that you know, you treat you know, if they're people that are fairly close in age and they're minors, say 16 and 17, you know, they are close enough in age, possibly, that there is no way that someone can take advantage. There's always a possibility, you know, there could be some other factors at play, you know,
Sure.
money and status, things like that can certainly
Well, that
play into that.
happens in adulthood too.
And yes, it does happen with adults too. But I think you're right that we shouldn't allow adults and children, you know, to have the ability to, uh, you know, to there's a dynamic there, and it just, I mean, I'm kind of lost for words because I didn't expect to talk about this, but it's mainly because I have no problem with age of consent laws as they are in most places right now,
Mm-hmm.
and I have no problem with um, with prosecution of someone who violates um, the law in this case, because one of the few acceptable roles of government is to um,
Protect the children.
protect children. And you know, people might say, "Well, it's a victimless crime." Well,
It's not
it,
though.
it's not. No, you're right. It's not a victimless crime because you can look at, you know, if you have someone who's say 14 with someone who's say this is not as extreme as I thought I would say, but say someone who's 25, you have someone who is obviously an adult, and you have someone who is a very young adult.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I would be okay with, say, a 25-year-old with an 18-year-old because there's still a power dynamic there, but they're both adults, you
Right.
know, versus, say, that 14-year-old with that 25-year-old. There is a lot at play there, and that adult should not be with that minor. And I can't see any legitimate reason to justify removing age of consent laws. I can't see any reason why someone would say that it's unjust, you know, because for the most part, and I'm sure someone will reach out to me and firebomb me about this, but for the most part, as long as the people involved are within a reasonable time frame, like a year or two of each other, or you have someone who's like, say, 17 and the person is, say, 14, something like that,
Mhm.
there are no issues. And beyond that, well, again, the law steps in because we all recognize that there is an issue at play. There is a power dynamic at play. And while you can have something like that with adults, it should not happen between adults and children, because parents, foster parents, step parents, anyone who is responsible for guiding a child into adulthood, who is responsible for their well-being, who is responsible for their care, they have a duty to protect those people, protect those children
Yes.
from outside parties. And in some cases, we have to have some outside force acting as a mediator. And in our society today, that outside force is government. In other times and places, it would have been a religious institution, you
I
know,
was just thinking that, yes.
and
But some people
we
aren't religious.
and some people aren't religious. We have more and more people who identify as agnostic or atheistic, um, you know, every day. And so we aren't at a point yet where we can have some sort of private mediator. Um, we aren't at a point where we can have polycentric law, but we can certainly work towards that.
Right.
And I don't see that happening inside of the United States anytime soon. But that doesn't mean that we can't work towards it. It doesn't mean that it isn't a noble goal to work towards having the ability for, again, an outside force, a mediator to deal with this. But I see no issues with the age of consent laws. If anything,
Me
age
either.
of consent, if anything, age of consent laws prevent vigilante, quote unquote, justice that could end up in more harm coming to someone who otherwise would have done, say, jail time or
Right.
some other punishment that's currently imposed by government.
Right. And mental health professionals have a very complicated chart. I mean, I think I've mentioned it to you that I went to school for this. I went to grad school for this, and in the ethics class, it was a specific class about ethics of child development. There was a very, very detailed chart with ages, and it was based on neuroscience of brain development, and also the combinations like we talked about, a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old versus a 17-year-old and a 30-year-old. So there was a very detailed chart about it that we had to learn, and the professor said, if you memorize anything from this class, this is what you need to memorize if you're going to be a practicing therapist. And all of it made sense. All of it made sense because it's not arbitrary. you can judge it as a professional. You know, if somebody is a month away from turning 17 or you know, that kind of thing, you don't take that into consideration. You don't just say, oh, you're 15 days away from turning 17. No, that's not how that works. So I think that the APA has actually developed a very good system of dealing with this. And I think that a lot of times people who talk about it don't really know how nuanced this is. And yes, I agree with you that that's, if we are to keep a government, that's something that the government should be involved in. And I'm probably going to get yelled at for this. So, so,
The,
so, all right, let's move on to our next topic, which is actually the easiest and most interesting one of them. Outreach. How do you reach people? How do you reach people to do libertarianism?
you get out from behind the keyboard. That's what you do, and you find something that you're passionate about, and you get involved in a local organization that deals with that passion. And beyond that, just give an example. I'm a member of South Carolina Carry. South Carolina Carry is a statewide gun rights organization here in South Carolina. I know, a surprise there. And what they do is they are online in a couple of different places, but they also have events that they do. And the people that tend to go to these events tend to be Republicans or libertarians. And for instance, back in April, the beginning of April, we had a march through downtown Columbia, which is South Carolina state capital.
Right.
And we marched from very close to the state Capitol building, very close to it, but not beside it, because of laws preventing us from being within a certain distance of the Capitol building. And we walked from there, our little march, through part of downtown Columbia, and we made our way to a park along a canal. And along the way, I and some others, we did live videos. And if you watch my live video on my personal Facebook page, you'll see that we stopped and we talked to people about gun laws in South Carolina. And so we were, I was walking around with a big, scary black Kalashnikov, and, along with a bright pink, little dainty looking fishing pole. And we were highlighting the insanity of South Carolina's gun laws.
Mm-hmm.
And it gave us an opportunity to talk to people, because they were like, okay, you guys have got the cops that are behind you, and there are cops that are in front of you, and they're riding along beside you guys kind of close by. What's going on here? You guys are strictly legal, right? And we said, yeah, but here is what's going on with the law. This is why we're able to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And by exposing just how ridiculous the law is, in this case, in South Carolina, if you're hunting or fishing or on your way to hunt or fish, you can open carry a handgun. You can open carry a long gun, a rifle or a shotgun without any issues anywhere in the state. But open carry of a handgun, they have restricted it. And so that's why I was walking around with a fishing pole. We were on a quote unquote fishing trip. And
Mm-hmm.
that's outreach. It's telling people about this cause. And there are people that we met that are traditionally Democrats, people that are traditionally Republicans, and people that just don't know where they are. And they're the 10% of the country that claims to be an independent. And talking with those people and doing that live video and just being there for an event like that, that creates a lot of people who are interested in what's going on. So you've got to get out from behind the keyboard and you've got to find something that you're passionate about. Because if you're passionate about it, with certain exceptions, of course, kind of hinting back to what we were talking about, age of consent, um, go jump off a cliff. But with the exception of certain things, if you're passionate about something, there are bound to be other people that are passionate about the same thing. Maybe not on the same level as you, but perhaps even further than you. And what you can do with that is if you get out there, you put yourself out there, people will see you, people will be interested in it, they'll want to know more. And then that allows you as a big L libertarian or a little L libertarian to get people who probably would identify as a libertarian if you laid out, hey, these are the things that the Libertarian Party believes. These are things that libertarians believe in, and if you believe in these things, you're a libertarian. And it's just a matter of being passionate about something that you are, like I said, passionate about, and getting people who are passionate about that same thing to be interested. And then from there, you may start out, you're one person in one county. From there, you have the ability to reach out to people across your county and then across your state. The other thing that you need to do is you need to get involved with politics. And national politics is the big sexy thing that everyone wants to get involved with. Everyone wants to rant about Donald Trump, or Rand Paul, Justin Amash, or whoever the villain of the week is from the Republican Party, or they want to talk about whoever the villain of the week is from the Democratic Party. Frederica Wilson comes to mind. Nancy Pelosi comes to mind. AOC and the rest of her squad come to mind.
Yes.
But what is actually more important and what will actually get you results on the local level is engaging with local and state politics. That's why I went to Columbia for that open carry march. It's why I go to my city council meetings, because that firehouse.
I go to city council meetings too.
Yeah, that firehouse. People are passionate about the firehouse. People are passionate about where they want to place the firehouse. And if people see you there and they see you fighting for liberty on the small scale in the city council, and they see you calling, your city council members a bunch of petty tyrants because they're doing things that are trampling on your liberties, that gets people's attention. It was a few months ago that someone showed up to a city council meeting in my town, and it was during the winter. The guy showed up with a jacket and walked up to a podium, and he pulled out a can of like the cheapest beer that you can think of and put it on the podium. He didn't open the can up, but he had the can there, and he was protesting a new alcohol ordinance that they were proposing inside of the city. And that got people's attention. You can be that person. There is something that you're passionate about. There's something that people where you are passionate about, and you can be that person. Yeah. The other thing that you should really do is look at some issue that people are passionate about where you can actually help the community. Going and yelling at your government is a very popular thing for libertarians to do. It's an easy thing for libertarians to do if you have a little bit of backbone. Because who doesn't want to yell at their government?
I don't. I see. I don't yell. I've been going to city council meetings for years, and also I've participated in two different merchants associations here in my city. And the things I usually get involved in is how do we build this park? What's the most logical place for placing things? And it's extremely boring things.
Yeah.
But you know, I do the same thing with my HOA. But I'm interested in this kind of stuff of making things logically practical and you know fiscally uh, obtainable.
Yeah.
So I've been doing this for years.
I mean, good on you. But um, beyond that, what you need to do, not you specifically, Anna.
I know you're not talking to specifically me. Yes.
It's the general you. Um, you need to find a way that you can perform some kind of community service, whether that's spreading knowledge, whether that's helping to say adopt a highway, being part of adopt a highway where you go and you pick up the trash, not something that you necessarily want to do, but something that's good for your community and gets people engaged. And here in South Carolina, they actually, with the Adopt a Highway program that we have now, when you go and you adopt a strip of, I think it's a mile, it might be more, might be less, but I think it's a mile of highway anywhere in the state, they will give you the sign with your name or the organization that you're a part of that's part of the highway cleanup. They'll put it on the sign for the Adopt a Highway sign. It's part of what you're doing. And so that can draw people's attention. That can have people be aware of, hey, you know what? The local Libertarian Party adopted this strip of highway because they care about our community. They care about keeping this area of the road clean, and they are doing their part because that's what they're doing. So little things like that, which doesn't take a whole lot of your time. It can be something that you do, depending on where you are, once a month on a Saturday, or it can be something that you do every week. And as you are getting people out there, as people are becoming aware of you as a person or you as part of an organization, you're going to get more people that are going to want to do more. And like I said, you may start out with one person in one city, one person in one county, but as you get more people, you're going to have the potential to grow exponentially because each one of those people that you bring in has the ability to bring in more people.
Yes.
Don't force people to be passionate about the thing that you're passionate about. Get people who are passionate about the thing you're passionate about, and then get them to find other people that are passionate about other things. And this is how you build grassroots organization.
Yes.
This is how you get people that are interested in not just the Libertarian Party, but in libertarianism and liberty. And the other thing with this is working with the other parties that are around you. Work with Republicans where it makes sense. Work against them when it makes sense. Work with Democrats when it makes sense. And let me know when it makes sense to work with Democrats outside of drug outside of the drug war. I don't know where Democrats make sense outside of the drug war anymore.
That's a topic for a different conversation for us.
Topic for a different conversation.
Right.
But the idea with all of this is that you are getting people out there, you're getting yourself out there, and then advertise it. Through Facebook.
Right.
Have an event. Have social gatherings.
Right.
If you're a person who likes to drink, well, go out and drink. Have a libertarian social, and talk with people about the topics that matter to them, not just you, but to them. Um, if you're a person who likes to smoke weed and you can smoke weed, then do the same thing, but with weed. If you're someone like me who can't smoke weed and can't drink alcohol, maybe it's video games. Maybe it's a day at the range. Maybe it's something entirely different.
Oh, are you a gamer?
Um, Only in the very loosest sense of the word.
Okay.
I haven't touched a like well
A
I,
console?
I haven't touched a console in a while. I don't count like showing up to a friend's house and playing Super Mario Karts, playing Mario Kart 64 for
Oh,
2 hours. I
oh,
don't I don't
I
I
remember.
don't count I don't count that as gaming anymore. I used to be the kind of person who could play like Call of Duty or Halo or something similar for a couple hours. Or gosh, when I was single, Mass Effect. I could play Mass Effect until like the wheels broke inside the Xbox. So, but I'm
I
not that person anymore.
Yeah, see, I don't have any consoles anymore. I used to play. This was years ago. I used to play Age of Empires.
Hmm. Yeah, I used to like real-time strategy games.
Yes.
I grew up on a few, had a lot of fun with them. But I am just a console pleb, and I honestly I don't have the time. In
Yeah, I
part
don't.
because I don't have the time. In part because I have the young son, I have the wife, I have all of the political stuff that I'm doing,
Right.
everything that I'm trying to do to spread liberty um, outside of actual politics. It takes a lot of time, and I'm better for it because if you look at people who spend a ton of time gaming, it's possible for you to spend so much time there that you could have earned a master's degree, you know, if you spend enough time there. That's not something that I want to do with my life.
That's why I don't have a console because I know my tendency to just get sucked into a game and 2 days later the whole weekend is gone. So yeah, that's
Very
why.
easy to do that.
Um, but yeah, that was actually my favorite, Age of Empires. But that
You
was
know,
years ago.
yeah, there are a lot of good ones out there. Um, you know, I I played all sorts of RTS games, and I can't name most of them. And the ones that I can name um, are from the last millennium. So yeah, so I don't feel too great about that, but that's all right.
Yeah, no, yeah, same here. I remember the old games. Yeah, I don't even know a lot of the stuff that's going on right now, to be honest. So, so we were just on the topic of games, and now the thing that we really would want to talk about is food.
Yes, the thing that will unite everyone is
Yes,
food. We're
yes.
not going to talk. We're not going to talk about pizza because if we talk about pizza, then the great debate
Pineapple
will.
is gonna happen. Yeah.
Yeah, that debate is not going to happen with me. I don't.
Do you
I,
really use pineapple on pizza?
so I have had pineapple on pizza in a couple of different instances. Um, I actually, when I was in the Marines, I met a guy. He was a legal immigrant to the U.S. and he was originally from Guatemala,
Okay.
and he had what he called Guatemalan style pizza, which was I'll describe it to you, and you can decide what you think of it. It had pineapple, it had bacon, it had pepperoni, it had um, ham, and extra cheese, and I can't remember what else he had, but I mean that's what he called a Guatemalan pizza. So
Mm,
sounds a lot like a Hawaiian pizza to me. So
that's yeah. I see. I would do it differently. I would have pineapple, prosciutto, and maybe some arugula on it. So it's kind of a, I don't know. I live in California, so we do things differently here.
yeah, that is some fancy pizza right there. The the fanciest that I ever got was when I was at Clemson University in 2012. This was summer of 2012. This is shortly before I met my wife, and I would get these extra large, like the largest pizzas that this particular local pizza shop made, and as a slice, even young 25-year-old David Weikle who would just eat everything, a slice was good for a meal. That's how big it was. That's how like packed full of food it
Oh,
was. And it had cheese and feta cheese and pineapple and pepperoni and maybe bacon
okay.
um, type deal. And that was I'd order that and that'd be like $20, not including any sort of tip. And then I was set for the next couple of days, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Being no, I mean, let's be realistic. I was at Clemson University. I was on the GI Bill and trying to save money where I could. So,
Okay. Well, that makes sense. And
but I don't put pineapple on pizza anymore. I don't begrudge people who put pineapple on pizza, but I do mess around with people because the memes are great.
yes, the memes are awesome. So I am so curious. Like this whole time we've been talking, all I want to know about is the mac and cheese in South Carolina.
So I have a couple of recipes, but I'll give you my wife's recipe for mac and
Yes.
cheese. I'll save my own recipe, which is far worse for you later on.
Yeah, your wife's recipe is definitely superior.
Well,
Oh,
it's a
yes.
matter of taste. Anyways, so my wife's recipe calls for a pound of pasta, macaroni. It can be
What kind of
elbows. It can be elbows. It can be shells. It can be that's basically it. It can be elbows or it can be shells.
but
You could
like kind of shorter pasta, not like long like spaghetti or angel hair, like shorter kind of,
no
yes,
it's the shorter
the
pasta that
macaroni type of pasta.
yeah
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
yeah. So you get the noodles ready. You cook them up in a good briny solution. Then you get a crock pot ready. Inside the crock pot, yes, inside the crock pot, you put in a pound of processed cheese. Most people would call it Velveeta, but Velveeta is the name brand. You don't have to get the name brand for this stuff.
Yellow cheese.
Yes, yellow cheese. It's not really cheese, but you get this stuff.
Uh-huh.
You cut it up so that it's gonna melt faster because of the heat, surface area, and
And
science.
probably like about one inch cubes, kind of, right? About that.
I mean, you could do 1 inch cubes. I do them smaller, but that's because we wanted it to melt faster.
Okay.
Um, and then you take a can of green chilies and tomatoes. You drain out most of the juice, and you throw that in.
Okay.
You've got the cheese melting. You've got um, the green chilies and tomatoes mixing together. Rotel is the name brand for that. Rotel is the name brand for that. And then you throw in the noodles, you mix it together, and then you have a pound of ground beef that you've cooked up.
You brown
The
it,
wiener,
right?
what's that?
You brown the beef first, right?
yeah, you brown the beef. You cook it up so that it's nice and just really small particles.
Mm-hmm.
The leaner the beef is, the better. You know, the faster it's going to cook, the less fat you have to worry about draining off.
Right.
And then you throw that all in the pot along with the noodles. You mix it up, and my wife loves it. It's a staple around here. A little while ago, we actually took the beef out, and she likes it better without the beef.
Oh.
So, yeah. And then you just, have some nice veggies on the side, and that's pretty good. But my personal recipe, I'll tell you,
Yes.
I'll save for another time.
I want to know your recipe as well. I lied when I said I want to know only hers. I want to know yours.
Well, my recipe calls for more cheese than actual noodles.
Okay.
So what you need is you cook up 2 pounds of pasta. You throw that into the crock pot with probably a few tablespoons full of butter, just enough to get the noodles wet. You know what I mean? Just enough to get them wet so that they don't stick
So
together.
that they don't stick. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Then you throw in 2 pounds of Velveeta, and you throw in about a pound of uh, shredded mozzarella, about a pound of shredded sharp cheddar,
Yeah. Okay.
and then with the idea there is that you want it to be, um, it will have that orange cheddar um, color, but it
Right.
will have a texture more like mozzarella, but it's soupy is the wrong word to use, but it's not so sticky like mozzarella. When it gets melty, it sticks to itself and to
It does. And
nothing.
it gets like yeah, pooly.
So you're gonna have this texture where it's stringy, but it's all orange. And then on the side, you can have a you can have um, Parmesan, and not that crappy Kraft stuff that's powder. I'm
Yeah,
talking about.
that's not, no one should ever use that. That should be banned by the government.
Oh, I'll disagree, but grated Parmesan, like actual, like the stick, the stuff that's comes, it's little
Yes, I
stick.
know.
Yeah,
The
so
real.
that stuff, have that stuff on the side, and then have on the side also. This is how you discover who your friends are. Have on the side another bag of Swiss, shredded Swiss. Not because you actually want to use it, but because it's going to help you to determine which of your friends have taste buds and which of them you should avoid. So
So
that's a
if
bad joke.
so no, it's not a bad joke, but it's a test. I'm taking it as a test. So if I added Swiss to that, um, would you ban me as a friend?
I wouldn't ban you as a friend, but I would question your taste when it comes to other things.
Yeah,
It's kind
yes.
of
I don't think that Swiss cheese goes with that.
No, I don't think it does either.
No.
But it's one of those things. It's kind of like you have to what is it? If you put out a bunch of beers in front of people and you've got everything from say Natty Light, Natural Light, all the way up to say Corona, and you've got everything in between, and you've got some fruity stuff like some hard ciders, and you've got Miller and Bud and just whatever else you can think of,
Hmm.
and someone goes for the Natty Light and the Corona, you know that person's taste buds are screwed up, and you know that you can't trust them when they say this is delicious. It's the
you
truth.
you are correct. You are absolutely correct. No, I have never made macaroni and cheese myself. I usually, when I do make pasta, it's usually angel hair with, tomatoes and um, either shrimp or lobster. That's what I do. But that's because I live on the coast. So. This is very informative, and I'm going to try this. Thank you so much for this recipe.
Yes. It will not be good for you though, just so you know. So if you have a
Yeah,
history
I'm pretty sure.
if you have a history of heart disease or any sort of heart failure, don't eat this more than once a year. And if you do, you should also look at eating in small portions. So like if you make this crock pot full of this stuff and you serve it, in a family of 5, and it's gone at the end of the meal, um, you should probably have a living will, and you should probably figure out who your pets are going to go to.
Makes sense. Um, you know, I don't cook meals like that very often, but there's one day a year when I do, which is Thanksgiving. And the last time my friends were over here at my house, and we were prepping the turkey, and I melted 3 sticks of butter. And I said, pour all that on the turkey to my friend. And then I said, just keep shoving butter under under the skin.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and she's like, how much butter am I putting into here? I said, oh, just as much as you can possibly fit. And it turned out to be the best turkey. Butter fixes everything. I'm telling you.
Yeah, you do have to be careful though, because there is such a thing as too much butter. There is in some cases there is. So there is such a thing as too much butter when you're making a pecan pie. You have too much butter, it will make it hard for it to set properly. And the other time you have too much butter, this is kind of a historical anecdote. But during World War II, members of the French Resistance, if they got too, we'll say, stopped up while they were out, fighting Hitler and the Germans, they would go and they would eat a portion of lard or butter to help, get things moving again. So that would be a case of too much butter. But beyond that, there's probably never an instance of too much butter. It does get wasteful at a certain point, though.
Right.
But I wish I had a slice of that turkey, because I imagine that even Paula Deen would be like, "This is delicious. Why didn't I do this first?"
It was really, really, really good turkey. And I'm hoping to do it again with more friends, and perhaps with you guys as well. And somehow we'll make it work. I just love having friends over, and that's my thing. So, okay, so I learned about mac and cheese, which was the most important part of this whole podcast. And I really want to thank you, David, for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, ma'am. I really do appreciate it.
It's been great, and I hope our listeners enjoy it. I mean, we covered a lot of topics that some of them were pretty heavy and involved. So it might take people some time to get through this, but like it even took us. So yeah, just thank you so much, and thank you for everyone who's listening. And we sign off for now.